Hello out there, everybody. How's it going, my kitty cat? I'm back. It's your boy Cat, back with another stream, another day, and this time around, something a little bit different. This time, instead of doing gaming, instead of doing, what streamers normally do, we're going to be reading a book. And today, I present to you The Giver by Lois Lowry. I'm pronouncing that correctly, I hope. Um, So, yeah, we'll see how this goes. Something new I wanted to try, see if it actually works. See if I stay awake, if I fall asleep. If we get through the whole book, we should. It's only about 180 pages, and it is a small book, so it's fairly light reading in terms of how books go. Um, so yeah, we'll see how that goes, and we'll see what happens. Sit back, relax, enjoy. If you fall asleep, hey, I guess I'm doing my job. And I guess as always, welcome to another catastrophe. Let's hope this isn't one. um, Before we jump into a few things, I'm gonna cover kind of what I've been doing at the start here, and that is the reason why I do these streams, the reason why this channel exists, and what I kind of hope for the future. And that is with supporting cats and clouder of kitties to be good to be specific. I forgot a word there. Yeah, so the whole channel here is to support cats in need, to support shelters, animal rescues, and the like, either monetarily, like financial wise, or otherwise with exposure and stuff like that. Very small channel. I want to build myself up before I kind of reach out and make connections and stuff like that, because I don't want to promise things I cannot deliver, right? So with that being said, right now, the kitties you can support by supporting this channel are Maya, Jeff, and Safi. These are three kitties that I either have the ability to showcase or have the permission to showcase on this channel with the permission of the owners of the kitties. Or like in Jeff's circumstance, he's my kitty. So by supporting this channel, you support him. And thank you very much with that. Much appreciated. Down the road, I do hope to, as we become a bigger channel, reach out to these organizations, get their assistance, and also create stuff for like merchandise or other monetary incentives for the channel, as it were, so that you can offer your support for a cause that you care about. That's the whole point. So with that out of the way, I think we're going to jump right in. Before we do, I guess I'll switch to the book scene, and then we'll go from there. So, let me update this. This will be stream rules. Oh, that's not centered. Uno momento. There we go. So, tonight I give you The Giver. Now, there's a couple rules we gotta go over while I do the stream, just for sake of brevity and sake of ease for the stream, and if people jump in. First and foremost is I will be reading without a pause between chapters. Between each chapter, there will be a pause, probably for a minute or two as I switch out to the next chapter. This is for my own sake of editing later on and stuff like that for down the road that I want to do. So with that in mind, the other big rule is I will not be looking at comments. I will not be replying to comments until a chapter is complete, or I need to pause for any particular thing, such as if Jeff comes up and wants some Jeff time, I will pause for that because he's my boy. So we got to do that. And so on and so forth. But for the sake of stuff, I will be looking at comments between chapters. If I do mess up when I read something, I guess this is another rule. If I do mess up when I read something, I will be starting from the start of the sentence once more in order to just kind of read that through again. This is not only for my own sake, but also like I hope to do recordings of these later down the road. So that is why I am doing that. But yeah, I guess with that out of the way, we'll drop that. Do that. I really wish it did that for me. There we go. But yes, without further ado, here we go. Tonight I bring you Storytime with C.A.T. Storytime with C.A.T presents The Giver. The Giver is a book written by Lois Lowry. If I'm mispronouncing that, I apologize. It is not my intention to mispronounce that at all. It is, to lack of a better word, I have put the synopsis in the description of the channel, so we don't need to pay attention to that. But I will be reading the book. I have a physical copy of the book. No, can't hear it. Can we hear it now? Yeah, okay. I have a physical copy of the book right in front of me. I'm going to be reading from that. And this is primarily going to be an auditory experience, just me reading the book, you as the viewer is listening. So you don't even really need to pay attention to what's on the screen if you don't want to. What is going to be changing on the screen is indicating what chapter we're reading. With this book being fairly short at 180, chapters will go by pretty fast. Pierce, there's like 23-ish chapters. There's exactly 23 chapters. So it'll be going by pretty quickly. I think I'll be able to read this within one stream, depending on how it goes. But this is kind of an experiment. So, without further ado, we begin The Giver, Chapter 1. Giver, Chapter 1. It was almost December, and Jonas was beginning to be frightened. No. Wrong word, Jonas thought. Frightened meant that deep, sickening feeling of something terrible about to happen. Frightened was the way he had felt a year ago when an unidentified aircraft had overflown the community twice. He had seen it both times. Squinting towards the sky, he had seen the sleek jet, almost a blur at its high speed, go past, and a second later heard the blast of a sound that followed. Then one more time, a moment later, from the opposite direction, the same plane. At first, he had been only fascinated. He had never seen aircraft so close, for it was against the rules for pilots to fly over the community. Occasionally, when supplies were delivered by cargo planes to the landing field across the river, children rode their bikes to the river. Retake that. Occasionally, when supplies were delivered by cargo planes to the landing field across the river, children rode their bicycles to the riverbank and watched, intrigued, the unloading and then the takeoff directed to the west, always away from the community. But the aircraft a year ago had been different. It was not a squat, fat-bellied cargo plane, but a needle-nosed single-pilot jet. Jonas, looking around anxiously, had seen others, adults as well as children, stop what they were doing and wait, confused, for an explanation of the frightening event. Then all of the citizens had been ordered to go into the nearest building and stay there. Immediately, the rasping voice through the speakers had said, "Leave your bicycles where they are." Instantly, obediently, Jonas had dropped his bike on its side of the path behind his Retake that. Instantly, obediently, Jonas had dropped his bike on its side on the path behind his Wow. Retake that again. Instantly, obediently, Jonas had dropped his bike on its side on the path behind his family's dwelling. He had run indoors and stayed there alone. Retake that. He had run indoors and stayed there, alone. His parents were both at work, and his little sister. Retake that. Wow. Harder to read out loud, isn't it? His parents were both at work, and his little sister, Lily, was at the child care center where she spent her after-school hours. Looking through the front window, he had seen no people, none of the busy afternoon crew of street cleaners, landscape workers, and food delivery people who usually populated the community at that time of day. He saw only the abandoned bikes here and there on their sides. An upturned wheel on one was still revolving slowly. He had been frightened then. The sense of his own community silent, waiting, had made his stomach churn. He had trembled. But it had been nothing. Within minutes, the speakers had crackled again, and the voice, reassuring now and less urgent, had explained that a pilot in training had misread his navigational instructions and made a wrong turn. Desperately, the pilot had been trying to make his way back before his error was noticed. "Needless to say, he will be released," the voice had said, followed by silence. There was an ironic tone to that final message, as if the speaker found it amusing. And Jonas had smiled a little, though he knew what a grim statement it had been. For a contributing citizen to be released from the community was a final decision, a terrible punishment, an overwhelming statement of failure. Even the children were scolded if they used the term lightly at play, jeering at a teammate who missed a catch or stumbled in a race. Jonas had done it once, had shouted at his best friend, "That's it, Asher, you're released," when Asher's clumsy error had lost a match for his team. He had been taken aside for a brief and serious talk by the coach, had hung his head with guilt and embarrassment, and apologized to Asher after the game. Now, thinking about the feeling of fear as he pedaled home along the river path, he remembered that moment of palpable, stomach-sickening terror when the aircraft had streaked above. It was not what he was feeling now with December approaching. He searched for the right word to describe his own feeling. Jonas was careful about language. Not like his friend, Asher, who talked too fast and mixed things up, scrambling words and phrases until they were barely recognizable and often very funny. Jonas grinned, remembering the morning that Asher had dashed into the classroom, late as usual, arriving breathlessly in the middle of the chanting of the morning anthem. When the class took their seats at the conclusion of the patriotic hymn, Asher remained Retake that. When the class took their seats at the conclusion of the patriotic hymn, Asher remained standing to make his public apology as was required. "I apologize for inconveniencing my learning community." Asher ran through the standard apology phrase rapidly, still catching his breath. The instructor and class waited patiently for his explanation. Students had all been grinning as they had listened to Asher's explanation so many times before. "I left home at the correct time, but when I was riding along near the hatchery, the crew was separating some salmon. Guess I just got distraught watching them. I apologize to my classmates," Asher concluded. He smoothed his rumpled tunic and sat down. "We accept your apology, Asher." The class recited the standard response in unison. Many of the students were biting their lips to keep from laughing. "I accept your apology, Asher," the instructor said. He was smiling. "And I thank you, because once again you provided an opportunity for a lesson in language. Distraught is too strong an adjective to describe salmon viewing." He turned and wrote "distraught" on the instructional board. Beside it he wrote "distracted." Jonas, nearing his home now, smiled at the recollection. Thinking still as he wheeled his bike into his narrow port beside the door, he realized that frightened was the wrong word to describe his feelings, now that December was almost here. It was too strong an adjective. It waited a long time for the special December. Now that it was almost upon him, he wasn't frightened, but he was eager, he decided. He was eager for it to come, and he was excited, certainly. All the 11s were excited about the event that would be coming so soon. But there was a little shudder of nervousness when he thought about it, about what might happen. Apprehensive, Jonas decided. That's what I am. Who wants to be the first tonight for feelings? Jonas's father asked at the conclusion of their evening meal. It was one of the rituals, the evening telling of feelings. Sometimes Jonas and his sister Lily argued over turns, over who would get to go first. Their parents, of course, were part of the ritual. They, too, told their feelings each evening. But like all parents, all adults, they didn't fight and wheedle for their turn. Nor did Jonas tonight. His feelings were too complicated this evening. He wanted to share them, but he wasn't eager to begin the process of sifting through his own complicated emotions, even with the help that he knew his parents could give. You go, Lily, he said, seeing his sister, who was much younger, only a 7, wiggling with impatience in her chair. I felt very angry this afternoon, Lily announced. My childcare group was at the play area. We had a visiting group of 7s, and I didn't obey the rules at all. One of them, a male, don't know his name, kept going right to the front of the line for the slide, even though the rest of us were all waiting. I felt so angry at him, I made my hand into a fist, like this. She held up a clenched fist, and the rest of the family smiled at her small, defiant gesture. Why do you think the visitors didn't obey the rule? Mother asked. Lily considered and shook her head. I don't know. They acted like animals, Jonas suggested. He laughed. That's right, Lily said, laughing too. Like animals. Neither child knew what the word meant exactly, but it was often used to describe someone uneducated or clumsy, someone who didn't fit in. Where were the visitors from? Father asked. Lily frowned, trying to remember. Our leader told us when he made the welcome speech, but I can't remember. Guess I wasn't paying attention. It was from another community. They had to leave very early, and they had their midday meal on the bus. Mother nodded. Do you think it's possible the rules may be different? And so they simply didn't know what your play area rules were? Lily shrugged and nodded. I suppose. You visited other communities, haven't you? Jonas asked. My group has often. Lily nodded again. When we were 6s, we went and shared a whole school day with a group of 6s in their community. How did you feel when you were there? Lily frowned. I felt strange because their methods were different. They were learning usages that my group hadn't learned yet, so we felt stupid. Father was listening with an interest. I'm thinking, Lily, he said, about the boy who didn't obey the rules today. Do you think it's possible that he felt strange and stupid being in a new place with rules that he didn't know about? Lily pondered that. Yes, she said finally. I feel a little sorry for him, Jonas said. Even though I don't even know him, I feel sorry for anyone who is in a place where he feels strange and stupid. How do you feel now, Lily? Father asked. Still angry? I guess not, Lily decided. I guess I feel a little sorry for him. and sorry I made a fist. She grinned. Jonas smiled back at his sister. Lily's feelings were always straightforward, fairly simple, usually easy to resolve. He guessed that his own had been too, when he was a 7. He listened politely, though not very attentively, while his father took his turn, describing a feeling of worry that he had had that day at work, concern about one of the new children who wasn't doing well. Jonas's father's title was nurturer. He and the other nurturers were responsible for all the physical and emotional needs of every new child during his earliest life. It was a very important job, Jonas knew, but it wasn't one that interested him much. What gender is it? Lily asked. Male, father said. He's a sweet little male with a lovely disposition, but he isn't growing as fast as he should, and he doesn't sleep soundly. We have him in the extra care section for supplementary nurturing, but the community is beginning to take... We'll retake that. We have him in the extra care section for supplementary nurturing, but the community... Retake that. We have him in the extra care section for supplementary nurturing, but the committee is beginning to talk about releasing him. Oh, no, Mother murmured sympathetically. How sad that must make you feel. Jonas and Lily both nodded sympathetically as well. Release of new children was always sad, because they hadn't had a chance to enjoy life within the community yet. They hadn't done anything wrong. There were only 2 occasions of release. Retake that. There were only 2 occasions of release, which were not punishment. Release of the elderly, which was a time of celebration for a life well and fully lived, and release of a new child, which always brought a sense of what could we have done. This was especially troubling for the nurturers, like father, felt they had failed somehow, but it happened very rarely. Well, father said, gonna keep trying. May ask the committee for permission to bring him here at night, if you don't mind. You know what the night crew nurturers are like. I think this little guy needs something extra. Of course, Mother said. Jonas and Lily nodded. They had heard father complain about the night crew before. It was a lesser job, night crew nurturing, assigned to those who lacked the interest or skills or insight for the more vital jobs of the daytime hours. Most of the people on the night crew had not even been given spouses because they lacked, somehow, the essential capacity to connect to others, which was required for the creation of a family unit. Maybe we could even keep him, Lily suggested, sweetly, trying to look innocent. The look was fake, Jonas knew. They all knew. Lily, Mother reminded her, smiling, you know the rules. 2 children, 1 male, 1 female, each family unit. It was written very clearly in the rules. Lily giggled. Well, she said, thought maybe just this once. Next, Mother, who held a prominent position at the Department of Justice, talked about her feelings. Today, a repeat offender had been brought before her, someone who had broken the rules before, someone who she had hoped been adequately and fairly punished, had been restored to his place, to his job, his home, his family unit. To see him brought before her a second time caused her overwhelming feelings of frustration and anger, and even guilt that she hadn't made a difference in his life. I feel frightened, too, for him, she confessed. You know that there's no third chance. Rules say that if there's a third transgression, he simply has to be released. Jonas shivered. He knew it happened. There was even a boy in his group of 11s whose father had been released years before. No one ever mentioned it. The disgrace was unspeakable. It was hard to imagine. Lee stood up and went to her mother. She stroked her mother's arm. From his place at the table, father reached over and took her hand. Jonas reached for the other. One by one, they comforted her, Soon she smiled, thanked them, murmured that she felt soothed. Ritual continued. Retake that. The ritual continued. Jonas? Father asked. Your last tonight. Jonas sighed. This evening he almost would have preferred to keep his feelings hidden, but it was, of course, against the rules. I'm feeling apprehensive, he confessed, glad that the appropriate descriptive word had finally come to him. Why is that, son? Father looked concerned. I know there's really nothing to worry about, Jonas explained, and every adult has been through it. I know you have, Father, and you too, Mother. But it's the ceremony that I'm apprehensive about. Almost December. Lily looked up, her eyes wide. Ceremony of 12, she whispered in an odd voice. Even the smallest children, Lily's age and younger, knew that it lay in the future for each of them. I'm glad you told us of your feelings, Father said. Lily, Mother said, beckoning to the little girl. Go on now and get into your night clothes. Father and I are going to stay here and talk to Jonas for a while. Lily sighed, but obediently she got down from her chair. Privately? She asked. Mother nodded. Yes, she said. This talk could be a private one with Jonas. And that is chapter 1. And hello, Evie. How's it going? Welcome to the stream. Glad I could have you. So I covered this at the start, but because you're here now, basically I'll be looking at comments between chapters and kind of doing like some chapter stuff, like updating what the chapter says on the screen, and also kind of taking a drink and taking questions and stuff like that. So that's one thing. Another thing, obviously I am going to be skipping. You sound so professional. Oh, thanks. I'm just a loser sitting on his chair. So yeah, there will be some times where like I jumble over the word. So that'll kind of be when I kind of pause. Most likely we'll say, well, I'll retake that and then read over it again, starting at the beginning of the sentence. So you get to witness all the ups and downs of trying to read out loud. Good old college try, like when you are asked in a classroom to stand up, be like, all right, your turn to read the next sentence or paragraph. It's like, oh boy, in front of the class. Oh, okay. But yeah, so the idea behind some of this stuff is I do want to turn this into recordings down the road. So and then obviously that will be edited to edit out some of the jumbled words and stuff like that. But yeah, welcome. We're going to be doing this. There's 23 chapters. It's 180 pages approximately. So we'll see how far we get tonight. I'm hoping we can get through the whole thing. We shall see. And with that, we move on to the next chapter. Chapter 2. The Giver, Chapter 2. Jonas watched as his father poured a fresh cup of coffee. He waited. You know, his father finally said, every December was exciting to me when I was young. And it's been for you and Lily too, I'm sure. Each December brings such changes. Jonas nodded. He could remember the Decembers back to when he had become, well, probably a 4? The earlier ones were lost to him, but he observed them each year, and he remembered Lily's. Retake that. The earlier ones were lost to him, but he observed them each year, and he remembered Lily's earliest Decembers. He remembered when his family received Lily, the day she was named, the day that she became a 1. The ceremony for the 1s was always noisy and fun. Each December, all the new children born in the previous year turned 1. 1 at a time. They were always 50 in each year's group. None had been released. Retake that. One at a time. There were always 50 in each year's group, if none had been released. They had been brought to the stage by the nurturers who had cared for them since birth. Some were already walking, wobbly on their unsteady legs. Others no more than a few days old, wrapped in blankets, held by their nurturers. Enjoy the naming, Jonas said. Mother agreed, smiling. The year we got Lily. We knew, of course, that we'd receive our female, because we'd made our application and been approved. But I'd been wondering and wondering what her name would be. I could have sneaked a look at the list prior to the ceremony, Father confided. The committee always makes the list in advance, and it's right there in the office at the nurturing center. Excuse me. As a matter of fact, he went on, I feel a little guilty about this, but I did go in this afternoon and look to see if this year's naming list had been made yet. It was right there in the office. I looked up number 36. That's the little guy I've been concerned about, because it occurred to me that it might enhance his nurturing if I could call him by a name. Just privately, of course, when no one else is around. Did you find it? Jonas asked. He was fascinated. It didn't seem a terribly important rule, but the fact that his father had broken a rule at all awed him. He glanced at his mother, the one responsible for adherence to the rules, and was relieved that she was smiling. His father nodded. His name, if he makes it to the naming without being released, of course, is to be Gabriel. So I whisper that to him when I feel him every... Retake that. His name, if he makes it to the naming without being released, of course, is to be Gabriel. So I whisper that to him when I feed him every 4 hours, and during exercise and playtime. If no one can hear me. Call him Gabe, actually. He said and grinned. Gabe. Jonas tried it out. Good name, he decided. Though Jonas had only become a 5 the year that they acquired Lily and learned her name, he remembered the excitement, the conversations at home, wondering about her, how she would look, who she would be, how she would fit into their established family unit. He remembered climbing the steps to the stage with his parents, his father by his side that year instead of with the nurturers, since it was the year that he would be given a new child of his own. He remembered his mother taking the new child, his sister, into her arms, while the dog members read to the assembled family units. New child 23. Namer had read, Lily. He remembered his father's look of delight, and his father had whispered, She's one of my favorites. I was hoping for her to be the one. The crowd had clapped, and Jonas had grinned. He liked his sister's name. Lily Barely... Retake that. Lily barely... Retake that. Lily, barely awake, had waved her small fist. Then had stepped down to make room for the next family unit. When I was an 11, father said now, as you are, Jonas, I was very impatient, waiting for the ceremony of 12. A long 2 days. Remember that I enjoyed the ones, as I always do, that I didn't pay much attention to the other ceremonies, except for my sister's. She became a 9 that year and got her bicycle. I'd been teaching her to ride mine, even though technically I wasn't supposed to. Jonas laughed. It was one of the few rules that was not taken very seriously and was almost always broken. Children all received their bicycles at 9. They were not allowed to ride bicycles before then, but almost always, the older brothers and sisters had secretly taught the younger ones. Jonas had been thinking already about teaching Lily. There was talk about changing the rule and giving the bicycles at an early age. committee was studying the idea, and something went to a committee for study, people always joked about it. They said that the committee members would become elders by the time the rule change was made. Rules were very hard to change. Sometimes, if it was a very important rule, unlike the one governing the age for bicycles, it would have to go, eventually, to the receiver for a decision. The receiver was the most important elder. Jonas had never seen him that he knew of. Someone in position of such importance lived and worked alone. But the committee would never bother the receiver with a question about bicycles. They would simply fret and argue about it themselves for years, until the citizens forgot that it had even gone to them for study. His father continued. So I watched and cheered when my sister... Retake that. Had to look at her name for a second. So I watched and cheered when my sister Katya became a 9 and removed her hair ribbons and got her bicycle. Father went on. Then I didn't pay much attention to the 10s and 11s. Finally, at the end of the second day, it seemed to go on forever. It was my turn. It was a ceremony of 12. Jonas shivered. He pictured his father, who must have been a shy and quiet boy, for he was a shy and quiet man, seated with his group, waiting to be called to the stage. The ceremony of 12 was the last of the ceremonies, the most important. I remember how proud my parents looked, and my sister too. Even though she wanted to be out riding the bicycle publicly, she stopped fidgeting and was very still and attentive when my turn came. But to be honest, Jonas, his father said, for me, there was not the element of suspense that there is with your ceremony, because I was already fairly certain of what my assignment was to be. Jonas was surprised. There was no way, really, to know in advance. It was a secret selection made by the leaders of the community, the Committee of Elders, who took the responsibility so seriously that there were never even any jokes made about assignments. His mother seemed surprised too. How could you have known? She asked. Father smiled his gentle smile. Well, it was clear to me. My parents later confessed that it had been obvious to them too what my aptitude was. I'd always loved the new children more than anything. When my friends in my age group were holding bicycle races or building toy vehicles or bridges with their construction sets or all the things I do with my friends, Jonas pointed out, and his mother nodded in agreement. I always participated, of course, because as children, we must experience all those things. And I studied hard in school, as you do, Jonas. But again and again, during free time, I found myself drawn to the new children. I spent almost all my volunteer hours helping in the nurturing center. Of course, the elders knew that, from their observation. Jonas nodded. During the past year, he had been aware of the increasing level of observation. In school, at recreation time, and during volunteer hours, he had noticed the elders watching him and the other 11s. He had seen them taking notes. He knew, too, that the elders were meeting for long hours with all the instructors that he and the other 11s had had during their years of school. So I expected it, and I was pleased, but not at all surprised when my assignment was announced as nurturer, Father explained. Did everyone applaud, even though they weren't supposed to? Retake that. Did everyone applaud, even though they weren't surprised? Jonas asked. Oh, of course. They were happy for me, that my assignment was what I wanted most. I felt very fortunate, his father smiled. Were any of the 11s disappointed in your year? Jonas asked. Unlike his father, he had no idea what his assignment would be, but he knew that some would disappoint him. Though he respected his father's work, nurture would not be his wish, and he didn't envy laborers at all. His father thought, no, I don't think so. Of course, the elders are so careful in their observations and selections. I think it's probably the most important job in our community. Retake that. think it's probably the most important job in our community, his mother commented. My friend Yoshiko, surprised by her selection as a doctor, father said. She was thrilled. And let's see, there was Andri. I remember that when we were boys, he never wanted to do physical things. Spent all the recreation time he could with his construction set, and his volunteer hours were always on building sites. The others knew that, of course. Andre was given the assignment of engineer, and he was delighted. Andre later designed the bridge that crosses the river to the west of town, Jonas's mother said. It wasn't there when we were children. There are very rarely disappointments, Jonas. I don't think you'll need to worry about that. His father reassured him. And if there are, you know there's an appeal process. They all laughed at that. The appeal went to a committee for study. I worry a little bit about Asher's assignment, Jonas confessed. Asher's such fun, but he doesn't really have any serious interests. He makes a game out of everything. His father chuckled. You know, he said, remember when Asher was a new child at the nurturing center before he was named? He never cried. He giggled and laughed at everything. All of us on the staff enjoyed nurturing Asher. The others know of Asher, his mother said. We'll find exactly the right assignment for him. Don't think you need to worry about him. But, Jonas, let me warn you about something that may not have occurred to you. I know I didn't think about it until after my ceremony of 12. What's that? Well, it's the last of the ceremonies, as you know. After 12, age isn't important. Most of us even lose track of how old we are as time passes, though the information is in the Hall of Open Records. We could go and look it up if we wanted to. What's important is the preparation for adult life and the training you'll receive in your assignment. I know that, Jonas said. Everyone knows that. But it means, his mother went on, that you move into a new group, and each of your friends will. You'll no longer be spending your time with your group of 11s. After the ceremony of 12, you'll be with your assignment group, with those in training. No more volunteer hours. No more recreation hours. So your friends will no longer be as close. Jonas shook his head. Asher and I will always be friends, he said firmly. There will still be school. That's true, father agreed. What your mother says is true as well. There will be changes. Good changes, though, his mother pointed out. After my ceremony of 12, I missed my childhood recreation. But when I entered my training for law and justice, I found myself with people who shared my interests. I made friends on a new level, friends of all ages. Did you still play at all after 12? Jonas asked. Occasionally, his mother replied. But it didn't seem as important to me. I did, his father said, laughing. I still do, every day, the nurturing center. I play bounce on the knee and peekaboo and hug the teddy. Reach over and stroke Jonas's neatly trimmed hair. Fun doesn't end when you become 12. Lily appeared, wearing her nightclothes, in the doorway. She gave an impatient sigh. This is certainly a very long private conversation, she said. There are certain people waiting for their comfort object. Lily, her mother said fondly, you're very close to being an 8. When you're an 8, your comfort object will be taken away. Be recycled to the younger children. You should be starting to go off to sleep without it. But her father had already gone to the shelf and taken down the stuffed elephant, which was kept there. Many of the comfort objects, like Lily's, were soft, stuffed, imaginary creatures. Jonas's had been called a bear. Here you are, Lily Billy, he said. I'll come help you remove your hair ribbons. Jonas's mother rolled their eyes, yet they watched affectionately as Lily and her father headed to her sleeping room with a stuffed elephant that had been given to her as the comfort object when she was born. His mother moved to her big desk and opened her briefcase. Work never seemed to end. Even when she was at home in the evening, Jonas went to his own desk and began to sort through his school papers for the evening's assignment. But his mind was still in December and the coming ceremony. Though he'd been reassured by the talk with his parents, he hadn't the slightest idea what assignment. Retake that. Though he hadn't been retake that again. Though he had been reassured by the talk with his parents, he hadn't the slightest idea what assignment the elders would be selecting for his future, or how he might feel about when the day come. And thus, we move on to chapter 3. Drink break. Going pretty quick. Page 20 already. I kind of figured this one would go pretty quick, though. So. Alright, let me see if I can reposition this. The lighting's kind of awkward. I think that's okay, right? Yeah, I can kind of read it like that. Ba 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 ba. All right. The Giver, chapter 3. Oh, look! Lily squealed in delight. Isn't he cute? Look how tiny he is. He has funny eyes like yours, Jonas. Jonas glared at her. He didn't like that she had mentioned his eyes. He waited for his father to chastise Lily, but father was busy unstrapping the carrying basket from the back of his bicycle. Jonas walked over to look. The first thing Jonas noticed as he looked at the new child, peering up curiously from the basket, the pale eyes. Almost every citizen in the community. Retake that. Almost every citizen in the community had dark eyes. Parents did. Lily did. So did all of his group members and friends. But there were a few exceptions. Jonas himself, and a female 5 who had noticed. Retake that. There were a few exceptions. Jonas himself, and a female 5 who he had noticed had the different, lighter eyes. No one mentioned such things. It was not a rule, but was considered rude to call attention to things that were unsettling or different about individuals. Lily, he decided, had to learn that soon. She would be called in for chastisement. Retake that. Lily, he decided, would have to learn that soon, or she would be called in for chastisement because of her insensitive chatter. Father put his bike into its port. Then he picked up the basket and carried it into the house. Lily followed behind, but she glanced back over her shoulder at Jonas and teased. Maybe he had the same birth mother as you. Jonas shrugged. Followed them inside. But he'd been startled by the new child's eyes. Mirrors were rare in the community. They weren't forbidden, but there were real no need for them. And Jonas had simply never bothered to look at himself very often, even when he found himself in a location where a mirror existed. Now, seeing the new child and his expression, he was reminded that the light eyes were not only a rarity, but gave the one who had them a certain look. What was it? Depth, he decided. As if one were looking into the clear water of the river, down to the bottom where things might lurk, which hadn't been discovered yet. He felt self-conscious, realizing that he, too, had that look. He went to his desk, pretending not to be interested in the new child. On the other side of the room, Mother and Lily were bending over to watch his father unwrap his blanket. "What's this comfort object called?" Lily asked, picking it up. Retake that. "What's this comfort object called?" Lily asked, picking up the stuffed creature, which had been placed beside the new child in his basket. Father glanced at it. "Hippo," he said. Lily giggled at the strange word. "Hippo," she repeated, and put the comfort object down again. She peered at the unwrapped new child, who waved his arms. "I think new children are so cute," Lily sighed. "I get assigned to be a birth mother." "Lily!" Mother spoke very sharply. "Don't say that. Very little honor in that assignment." "But I was talking to Natasha. You know the 10 who lives around the corner? She does some of her volunteer hours at the birthing center. And she told me that the birth mothers get wonderful food and they have very gentle exercise periods. And most of the time, they just play games and amuse themselves while they're waiting. I think I'd like that," Lee said petulantly. 3 years, Mother told her firmly. 3 births, and that's all. After that, they are laborers for the rest of their adult lives, till the day that they enter the house of the old. Is that what you want, Lily? 3 lazy years, and then hard physical labor until you are old? Well, no, I guess not, Lily acknowledged reluctantly. Father turned the new child onto his tummy in the base. Retake that. Father turned the new child onto his tummy in the basket. He sat beside it and rubbed its small back with a rhythmic motion. "Anyway, Lily Billy," he said affectionately, "birth mothers never even get to see new children. You enjoy the little ones so much, you hope for assignment as nurturer. When you're an 8 and start your volunteer hours, you can try some of the nurturing center," Mother suggested. "Yes, I think I will," Lily said. She knelt beside the basket. "What did you say his name is? Gabriel?" "Hello, Gabriel," she said in a sing-song voice. Then she giggled. "Oops," she whispered. "I think he's asleep. Guess I'd better be quiet." Jonas turned to the school assignments on his desk. No chance of that, he thought. Lily was never quiet. Probably she should hope for an assignment as speaker, that she could sit in the office with the microphone all day, making announcements. He laughed silently to himself, picturing his sister droning on in the self-important voice that all speakers seem to develop, saying things like, "Attention, this is a reminder to the females under 9 that hair ribbons are to be neatly tied at all times." He turned towards Lily and noticed to his satisfaction that her ribbons were, as usual, undone and dangling. There would be an announcement like that quite soon, he felt certain, and be directly... Retake that. There'd be an announcement like that quite soon, he felt certain, and it'd be directed mainly at Lily, though her name, of course, would not be mentioned. Everyone would know. Everyone had known, he remembered with humiliation, that the announcement, "Attention, this is a reminder to male 11s that objects are not to be removed from the recreation area and that snacks are to be eaten, not hoarded," had been specifically directed at him the day last month he had taken an apple home. No one had mentioned it, not even his parents, because the public announcement had been sufficient to produce the appropriate remorse. He had, of course, disposed of the apple and made his apology to the recreation director the next morning before school. Jonas thought again about that incident. He was still bewildered by it. Not by the announcement or the necessary apology, those were standard procedures. Then he had deserved them. But by the incident itself, probably should have brought up his feeling of bewilderment that very evening when the family unit had shared their feelings of the day. But he had not been able to sort out and put words to the source of his confusion, so he had let it pass. It had happened during the recreation period, when he had been playing with Asher. Jonas had casually picked up an apple from the basket where the snacks were kept, and had thrown it to his friend. Asher had thrown it back. They had begun a simple game of catch. There was nothing special about it. It was an activity that he performed countless times. Throw, catch, throw, catch. Doesn't retakes that. It was effortless for Jonas, and even boring, though Asher enjoyed it. Playing catch was a required activity for Asher because it would improve his hand-eye coordination. It was not up to standards. Suddenly Jonas had noticed, following the path of the apple through the air with his eyes, the piece of fruit had, well, this was the part that he couldn't adequately understand. The apple had changed. Just for an instant. It changed in midair, he remembered. Then it was in his hand. And then he looked at it carefully, but it was the same apple, unchanged. The same size and shape, perfect sphere. The same nondescript shade, about the same shade as his own tunic. There was absolutely nothing remarkable about that apple. He had tossed it back and forth between his hands a few times, then thrown it to Asher. And again, in the air for an instant only, it had changed. It had happened 4 times. Jonas had blinked, looked around, then tested his eyesight, squinting at the small print on the identification badge attached to his tunic. He read his name quite clearly. He could also clearly see Asher at the other end of the throwing area, and he had no problem catching the apple. Jonas had been completely mystified. Ash, he had called, "Did anything seem strange to you about the apple?" "Yes," Asher called back, laughing. "Jumps out of my hand onto the ground." Asher had just dropped it once again. So Jonas laughed too, with his laughter tried to ignore his uneasy conviction that something had happened. He had taken the apple home against the recreation area rules. That evening, before his parents and Lily arrived at the dwelling, he had held it in his hands and looked at it carefully. It was slightly bruised now, because Asher dropped it several times. There was nothing at all unusual about the apple. It held a magnifying glass to it. He had tossed it several times across the room, watching, and then rolled it around and around on his desktop, waiting for the thing to happen again. But it hadn't. The only thing that happened was the announcement later that evening over the speaker, the announcement that had singled him out without using his name, had caused both of his parents to glance meaningfully. Retake that. The only thing that happened was the announcement later that evening over the speaker, the announcement that had singled him out without using his name, that has caused both of his parents to glance meaningfully at his desk where the apple still lay. Now, sitting at his desk, staring at his schoolwork as his family hovered over the new child in his basket, he shook his head, trying to forget the odd incident. He forced himself to arrange his papers and try to study a little before the evening meal. The new child, Gabriel, stirred and whimpered, and Father spoke softly to Lily, explaining the feeding procedure as he opened the container that held the formula and equipment. The evening proceeded as all evenings did in the family unit. Retake that. The evening proceeded as all evenings did in the family unit, in the dwelling, in the community. Quiet, reflective, a time for renewal and preparation for the day to come. It was different only in addition to it of the new child with his pale, solemn, knowing eyes. About an hour for 3 chapters, not bad. Gotta read faster. The Giver, Chapter 4. Jonas rode at a leisurely pace, glancing at the bike spokes. What? Oh, retake that. Jonas rode at a leisurely pace, glancing at the bike ports beside the buildings to see if he could spot Asher's. He didn't often do his volunteer hours with his friend because Asher frequently fooled around and made serious work a little difficult. But now, with 12 coming so soon and the volunteer hours ending, it didn't seem to matter. The freedom to choose where to spend those hours had always seemed a wonderful luxury to Jonas. Other hours of the day were so carefully regulated. He remembered when he had become an 8, as Lily would do shortly, had been faced with that freedom of choice. The 8s always set out on their first volunteer hour a little nervously, giggling and staying in groups of friends. They almost invariably did their hours on recreation duty first, helping with the younger ones in a place where they still felt comfortable. But with guidance, as they developed self-confidence and maturity, they moved on to other jobs, gravitating towards those that would suit their own interests and skills. A male 11 named Benjamin had done his entire nearly 4 years in the rehabilitation center, working with citizens who had been injured. It was rumored that he was as skilled now as the rehabilitation directors themselves, and he even developed some machines and methods to hasten rehabilitation. There was no doubt that Benjamin would receive his assignment to that field and would probably be permitted to bypass most of the training. Jonas was impressed by the things Benjamin had achieved. He knew him, of course, since they had always been group mates. They never talked about the boy's accomplishments because such a conversation would have been awkward for Benjamin. There was never any comfortable way to mention or discuss one's success without breaking the rule against bragging, even if one didn't mean to. It was a minor rule, rather like rudeness, punishable only by gentle chastisement. But still, better to steer clear of an occasion governed by a rule which would be so easy to break. The area of dwellings behind him, Jonas rode past the community structures, hoping to spot Asher's bicycle parked beside one of the small factories or office buildings. He passed the childhood center where Lily stayed after school, and the play area surrounding it. He rode through the central plaza and the large auditorium where public meetings were held. Jonas slowed and looked at the name tags on the bicycles lined up outside the nurturing center. Then he checked those outside food distribution. It's always fun to see with... It's always fun to help with the deliveries, and he hoped he would find his friend there so that he could go together on the daily rounds, carrying the cartons of supplies into the dwellings of the community. But he finally found Asher's bicycle, leaning as usual, instead of upright in his port, as it should have been, at the house of the old. There was only one other child's bicycle there, that of a female 11 named Fiona. Jonas liked Fiona. She was a good student, quiet and polite, but she had a sense of fun as well. It didn't surprise him that she was working with Asher today. He parked his bicycle neatly in the port beside theirs and entered the building. "Hello, Jonas," the attendant at the front desk said. She handed him the sign-up sheet and stamped her own official seal beside his signature. All of his volunteer hours would be carefully tabulated at the Hall of Open Records. Once, long ago, it was whispered among the children that 11 had arrived at the ceremony of 12 only to hear a public announcement they had not completed the required number of volunteer hours and would not, therefore, be given his assignment. He had been permitted an additional month in which to complete the hours, and given his assignment privately with no applause, no celebration. Disgrace that had clouded his entire future. "It's good to have some volunteers here today," the attendant told him. "We celebrated a release this morning. That always throws the schedule off a little, so things get backed up." She looked at a printed sheet. "Let's see. Asher and Fiona are helping in the bathing room. Why don't you join them there? You know where it is, don't you?" Jonas nodded, thanked her, and walked down the side. Jonas nodded, thanked her, and walked down the long hallway. He glanced into the rooms on either side. The old were sitting quietly, some visiting and talking with one another, others doing handwork and simple crafts. Few were asleep. Each room was comfortably furnished, the floors covered with thick carpeting. It was a serene and slow-paced place, unlike the busy centers of manufacture and distribution where the daily work of community occurred. Jonas was glad that he had, over the years, chosen to do his hours in a variety of places so that he could experience the differences. He realized, though, that now focusing on one area meant he was left with not the slightest idea, not even a guess, of what his assignment would be. He laughed softly, thinking about the ceremony again. Jonas? He teamed himself? But he suspected that with the date so near, probably all of his friends were too. He passed a caretaker walking slowly with one of the old in the hallway. "Hello, Jonas," the young uniformed man said, smiling pleasantly. The woman beside him, whose arm he held, was hunched over as she shuffled along in her soft slippers. She looked towards Jonas and smiled, but her dark eyes were clouded and blank. He realized she was blind. He entered the bathing room with its warm, moist air and scent of cleansing lotions. He removed his tunic, hanging carefully on a wall hack. Retake that. He removed his tunic, hung it carefully on a wall hook, and put on the volunteer's smock that was folded on a shelf. "Hi, Jonas," Asher called from the corner, where he was kneeling beside a tub. Jonas saw Fiona nearby, at a different tub. She looked up and smiled at him, but she was busy, gently washing a man who lay in the warm water. Jonas greeted them and the caretaking attendants that worked nearby. Then he went to the row of padded lounge chairs where others of the old were waiting. He had worked here before. He knew what to do. "Your turn, Larissa," he said, reading the name tag on the woman's robe. "I'll just start the water and then help you up." He pressed the button on the nearby empty tub and watched as the warm water flowed in through the many small openings on the sides. The tub would be filled in a minute and the water flow would stop automatically. He helped the woman from the chair, led her to the tub, removed her robe, and steadied her with his hand on her arm as she stepped in and lowered herself. She leaned back and sighed with pleasure, right on a soft cushion headrest. "Comfortable?" he asked, and she nodded, her eyes closed. Jonas squeezed cleansing lotion onto the clean sponge at the edge of the tub and began to wash her frail body. Last night he had watched as his father bathed the new child. This was much the same. The fragile skin, the soothing water, the gentle motion of his hand, slippery with soap. The relaxed, peaceful smile on the woman's face reminded him of Gabriel being bathed. And the nakedness, too. It's against the rules for children or adults to look at another's nakedness, but the rule does not apply to new children or the old. Jonas was glad. It was a nuisance to keep oneself covered while changing for the games, and the required apology if one had by mistake glimpsed another's body was always awkward. Couldn't see why it was necessary. He liked the feeling of safety here in this warm and quiet room. He liked the expression of trust on the woman's face as she lay in the water, unprotected, exposed, and free. From the corner of his eye, he could see his friend Fiona help the old man from the tub, tenderly pat his thin, naked body dry with an absorbent cloth. She helped him into his robe. Jonas thought Larissa had drifted into sleep, as the old often did, and he was careful to keep his motions steady and gentle so he wouldn't wake her. He was surprised when she spoke, her eyes still closed. "This morning we celebrated the release of Roberto," she told him. "It was wonderful." "I knew Roberto," Jonas said. "Helped with his feeding the last time I was here, just a few weeks ago. He's a very interesting man." Larissa opened her eyes happily. "They told his whole life before they released him," she said. "They always do, but to be honest," she whispered with a mischievous look, "some of the tellings are a little boring. I've even seen some of the old fall asleep during tellings. When they released Edna recently. Did you know Edna?" Jonas shook his head. He couldn't recall anyone named Edna. Well, they try to make her life sound meaningful. And of course, she added primly, all lives are meaningful. Don't mean that they aren't. But Edna, my goodness, she was a birth mother. Then she worked in food production for years until she came here. She never even had a family unit. Larissa lifted her head and looked around to make sure no one else was listening. Then she confided, I don't think Edna was very smart. Jonas laughed. Retake that. Jonas laughed. He rinsed her left arm, laid it back into the water, and began to wash her feet. She murmured with pleasure as he massaged her feet with the sponge. But Roberto's life was wonderful, Larissa went on after a moment. He had been an instructor of 11s. You know how important that is. Been on the planning committee. And goodness, I don't know how he found the time, but also raised 2 very successful children. He was also the one who did the landscaping design for the Central Plaza. Didn't do the actual labor, of course. Now you're back. Lean forward. I'll help you sit up. Retake that. I think I burped. Now you're back. Lean forward and I'll help you sit up. Jonas put his arm around her and supported her as she sat. He squeezed the sponge against her back and began to rub her sharp boned shoulders. Tell me about the celebration. Well, there was the telling of his life. As always first, then the toast. We all raised our glasses and cheered. We chanted the anthem, made a lovely goodbye speech, and several of us made little speeches wishing him well. I didn't, though. Never been fond of public speaking. He was thrilled. You have seen the look on his face when they let him go. Jonas slowed the strokes of his hand on her back thoughtfully. Larissa, he asked, what happens when they make the actual release? Where exactly did Roberta go? She lifted her bare, wet shoulders in a small shrug. I don't know. I don't think anybody does, except the committee. He just bowed to all of us and then walked, like they all do, through the special door in the releasing room. Very sheenest look. Pure happiness, I'd call it. Jonas grinned. Wish I'd been there to see it. Larissa frowned. I don't know why they don't let children come. Not enough room, I guess. They should enlarge the releasing room. I have to suggest that to the committee. Maybe they'll study it, Jonas said slyly, and Larissa chortled with laughter. Right, she hooted, and Jonas helped her from the tub. Flying through these. Hot diggity down. Problem I'm running into is because I'm drinking a bubbly, I'm getting little bit of gas. So of course when I'm talking, I'm trying not to also like burp my friggin' head off here. So fun times. The Giver, Chapter 5. Usually, at the morning ritual, when the family members told their dreams, Jonas didn't contribute much. He rarely dreamed. Sometimes he awoke with a feeling of fragments of Retake that. Sometimes he awoke with a feeling of fragments afloat in his sleep, but he couldn't seem to grasp them and put them together into something worthy of telling at the ritual. But this morning was different. He had dreamed very vividly the night before. His mind wandered while Lily, as usual, recounted a lengthy dream. This one a frightening one in which she had, against the rules, been riding her mother's bicycle and been caught by the security guards. They all listened carefully and discussed with Lily the warning that the dream had given. Thank you for your dream, Lily, Jonas said the standard phrase automatically. tried to pay better attention while her mother told. Retake that. Thank you for your dream, Lily. Jonas said the standard phrase automatically and tried to pay better attention while his mother told of a dream fragment. Disquieting scene where she had been chastised for a rule infraction she didn't understand. Together they agreed that it probably resulted from her feelings when she had reluctantly dealt punishment to the citizen who had broken the major rules a second time. Father said that he had no dreams. Gabe? Father asked, looking down at the basket where the new child lay gurgling after his feeding, ready to be taken back to the nurturing center for the day. They all laughed. Dream-telling began with threes. New children dreamed. No one knew. Jonas? Mother asked. They always asked, though they knew how rarely Jonas had a dream to tell. I did dream last night, Jonas told them. He shifted in his chair, frowning. Good, Father said. Tell us. Details aren't clear, really, Jonas explained, trying to recreate the old dream. Retake that. Details aren't clear, really, Jonas explained, trying to recreate the odd dream in his mind. I think it was in the bathing room at the House of the Old. That's where you were yesterday, Father pointed out. Jonas nodded. But it wasn't really the same. There was a tub in the dream, but only one. And the real bathing house had rows and rows of them. But the room in the dream was warm and damp. I had taken off my tunic. I hadn't put on the smock. So my chest was bare. I was perspiring because it was so warm, and Fiona was there, the way she was yesterday. Asher too? Mother asked. Jonas shook his head. No, it was only me and Fiona, alone in the room, standing beside the tub. She was laughing, but I wasn't. I was almost a little angry at her in the dream, because she wasn't taking me seriously. Seriously about what? Lily asked. Jonas looked at his plate. For some reason that he didn't understand, he felt slightly embarrassed. I think I was trying to convince her that she should get into a tub of water. He paused. He knew he had to tell it all. That was not only all right, but necessary to tell all of a dream. So he forced himself to relate the part that made him uneasy. I wanted her to take off her clothes and get into the tub, he explained quickly. I wanted to bathe her and the sponge in my hand, but she wouldn't. She kept laughing and saying no. He looked up at his parents. That's all, he said. Can you describe the strongest feeling in your dream, son? Father asked. Jonas thought about it. Details were murky and vague, but the feelings were clear, flooded him again now as he thought. The wanting, he said. I knew that she wouldn't, and I think I knew that she shouldn't, but I wanted it so terribly. I could feel the wanting all through me. Thank you for your dream, Jonas, Mother said after a moment. She glanced at Father. Lily, Father said, it's time to leave for school. Would you walk beside me this morning and keep an eye on the new child's basket? Want to be certain he doesn't wiggle himself loose. Jonas began to rise to collect his school books. He thought it surprising that they hadn't talked about his dream at length before the thank you. Perhaps they found it as confusing as he had. Wait, Jonas, Mother said gently. I'll write an apology to your instructor so you won't have to speak one for being late. Psst. He sank back down to his chair, puzzled. He waved to Father and Lily as they left the dwelling, carrying Gabe in his basket. He watched while Mother tidied the remains of the morning meal and placed the tray by the front door for the collection crew. Finally, she sat down beside him at the table. Jonas, she said with a smile, feeling described as the wanting? It was your first stirrings. Father and I have been experiencing... Retake it. Father and I have been expecting it to happen to you. Happens to everyone. Happened to Father when he was your age, and happened to me. Happened someday to Lily. And very often, Brad, begins with a dream. Stirrings. He had heard the word before. He remembered that there was a reference to the stirrings in the Book of Rules, though he didn't remember what it said. And now and then the speaker mentioned it. Attention! A reminder that stirrings must be reported in order for treatment to take place. He'd always ignored that announcement because he didn't understand it, and it never seemed to apply to him in any way. He ignored it, as most citizens did. Many of the commands and reminders read by the speaker. Do I have to report it? He asked his mother. She laughed. You did, in the dream telling. And that's enough. But what about the treatment? The speaker says the treatment must take place. Jonas felt miserable. Just when the ceremony was about to happen, his ceremony of 12, would he have to go away someplace for treatment just because of a stupid dream? But his mother laughed again in a reassuring, affectionate way. No, she said. Just the pills. You're ready for the pills, that's all. That's the treatment for stirrings. Jonas brightened. He knew about the pills. Parents both took them each morning. Some of his friends did, he knew. Once he had been heading off to school with Asher, both of them on their bikes, when Asher's father had called from their dwelling doorway. Forgot your pill, Asher! Asher had groaned good-naturedly, turned his bike, and ridden back while Jonas waited. The sort of thing one didn't ask a friend about, because it might have fallen into that uncomfortable category of being different. Asher took a pill each morning. Jonas did not. Always better, less rude to talk about things that were the same. Now he swallowed a small pill that his mother handed him. That's all? He asked. That's all, she replied, turning the bottle to the cupboard. But you mustn't forget. I'll remind you the first weeks, but then you must do it on your own. If you forget, the stirrings will come back. The dreams of stirrings will come back. Sometimes the dosage must be adjusted. Asher takes them, Jonas confided. Mother nodded, unsurprised. Many of your group mates probably do. The males, at least. And they all will, soon. Females, too. How long will I have to take them? Until you enter the house of the old, she explained. All of your adult life, but it becomes routine. After a while, you won't even pay much attention to it. She looked at her watch. If you leave right now, you won't be late for school. Hurry along. And thank you again, Jonas, she added, as he went to the door, for your dream. Pedaling rapidly. Retake that. Pedaling rapidly down the path, Jonas felt oddly proud to have joined those who took the pills. For a moment, though, he remembered the dream again. Dream he felt pleasurable. Retake that. Dream had felt pleasurable. Though the feelings were confused, he thought that he had liked that. Retake that. Though the feelings were confused, he thought that he had liked the feelings that his mother had called stirrings. He remembered that upon waking, he had wanted to feel the stirrings again. Then, in the same way that his own dwelling slipped away behind him as he rounded a corner on his bicycle, the dream slipped away from his thoughts. Very briefly, a little guiltily, he tried to grasp it back, but the feelings had disappeared. The stirrings were gone. Another chapter done. Gotta, lick my lips. The Giver, Chapter 6. Lily, please hold still, Mother said again. Lily, standing in front of her, fidgeted impatiently. I can tie them myself, she complained. I always have. You know that, Mother replied, straightening the hair ribbons on the little girl's braids. I also know that they constantly come loose, and more often than not, they're dangling down your back by afternoon. Today, at least, we want them to be neatly tied and to stay neatly tied. Don't like hair ribbons. I'm glad I only have to wear them one more year, Lily said irritably. Next year I get my bikes. Retake that. Next year I get my bicycle too, she added more cheerfully. There are good things each year, Jonas reminded her. This year you get to start your volunteer hours. I remember last year when you became a 7, you were so happy to get your front button jacket. The little girl nodded and looked down at herself, a jacket with this row of large buttons that designated her as a 7. 4s, 5s, and 6s all wore jackets that fastened down the back so that they would have to be helpful. Okay, I have to retake that. 4s, 5s, and 6s all wore jackets that fastened down the back so that they would have to help each other dress and would learn interdependence. The front button jacket was the first sign of independence, the first very visible sign of growing up. The bicycle at 9 would be the powerful emblem of moving gradually out into the community, away from the protective family unit. Lily grinned and wriggled away from her mother. And this year you get your assignment, she said to Jonas in an excited voice. We get pilot, and you take me flying. Sure I will, said Jonas. I'll get a special little parachute that just fits you. I'll take you up to, maybe 20,000 feet and open the door and... Jonas, Mother warned. I was only joking, Jonas groaned. I don't want pilot anyway. If I get pilot, I'll put in an appeal. Come on, Mother said. She gave Liz ribbons a final tug. Jonas, are you ready? Did you take your pill? I want to get a good seat in the auditorium. She prodded Lily to the front door and Jonas followed. The short ride to the auditorium, Lily waving to their friends from the seat of the back of Mother's bicycle. Jonas stowed his bicycle beside Mother's and made his way through the throng to find his group. The entire community attended the ceremony each year. For the parents, it meant 2 days' holiday from work. They sat together in the huge hall. Children sat with the groups until they went, one by one, to the stage. Father, though, would not join Mother in the audience right away. For the earliest ceremony, the naming, the nurturers brought the new children to the stage. Jonas, from his place in the balcony with the 11s, searched the auditorium for a glimpse of Father. It wasn't at all hard to spot the nurturers section at the front. Coming from it were the wails and howls of the new children who sat squirming on the nurturers' laps. At every other public ceremony, the audience was silent and attentive. But once a year, they all smiled indulgently. Retake that. But once a year, they all smiled indulgently at the commotion from the little ones wanting to receive their names and families. Jonas finally caught his father's eye and waved. Father grinned and waved back. They held up the hand of the new child on his lap, making it wave too. It wasn't Gabriel. Gabe was back at the nurturing center today, being cared for by the night crew. He had been given an unusual and special reprieve from the committee and granted an additional year of nurturing for his naming and placement. Father had gone before the committee with a plea on behalf of Gabriel, but had not yet gained the weight appropriate to his days of life, nor begun to sleep soundly enough at night to be placed with his family unit. Normally, such a new child would be labeled inadequate and released from the community. Instead, as a result of Father's plea, Gabriel had been labeled uncertain and given the additional year. He would continue to be nurtured at the center and would spend his nights with Jonas's family unit. Each family member, including Lily, had been required to sign a pledge that they would not become attached to this little temporary guest, and that they would relinquish him without protest or appeal when he was assigned to his own family unit at next year's ceremony. At least, Jonas thought, After Gabriel was placed next year, they'd still see him often because he would be part of the community. If he was released, they would not see him again, ever. Those who were released, even as new children, were sent elsewhere and never returned to the community. Father had not had to release a single new child this year, so Gabriel would have represented a real failure and sadness. Even Jonas thought he didn't hover over the little one the way Lily and his father did. He was glad that Gabe had not been released. The first ceremony began right on time. Jonas watched as one after another each new child was given a name and handed by the nurturers to its new family unit. For some, it was a first child, but many came to the stage accompanied by another child beaming with pride to receive a little brother or sister, the way Jonas had when he was about to be 5. Asher poked Jonas's arm. "Remember when we got Philippa?" he asked in a loud whisper. Jonas nodded. It had only been last year. Asher's parents had waited quite a long time before applying for a second child. Maybe Jonas suspected. They'd been so exhausted by Asher's lively foolishness they had needed a little time. 2 of the group, Fiona and another female named Thea, were missing temporarily, waiting with their parents to receive new children. But it was rare that there was such an age gap between children in a family unit. When her family ceremony was completed, Fiona took the seat that had been saved for her in the row ahead of Asher and Jonas. She turned and whispered to them, "He's cute. I don't like his name very much." She made a face and giggled. Fiona's new brother had been named Bruno. It wasn't a great name, Jonas thought. Like Gabriel, for example. But it was okay. The audience applause, which was enthusiastic at each nurturing. Let me retake that. Gotta love pages. The audience applause, which was enthusiastic at each naming, rose in exuberant swell when one parental pair, glowing with pride, took a male newborn and heard him named Caleb. This new Caleb was a replacement child. The couple lost their first Caleb, cheerful little 4. Loss of a child was very, very rare. The community was extraordinarily safe, each citizen watchful and protective of all children. But somehow the first little Caleb had wandered away unnoticed and had fallen into the river. The entire community had performed the ceremony of loss together. Retake that. The entire community had performed the ceremony of loss together, murmuring the name of Caleb throughout an entire day, less and less frequently, softer in volume, as the long and somber day went on, so that the little 4 seemed to fade away gradually from everyone's consciousness. Now, at the special naming, the community performed the brief murmur of replacement ceremony, repeating the name for the first time since the loss, softly and slowly at first, then faster and with greater volume. As the couple stood on the stage with the new child sleeping in their mother's arms, it was as if the first Caleb was returning. Another new child was given the name Roberto, and Jonas remembered that Roberto the Old had been released only last week. There was no murmur of replacement ceremony for the new little Roberto. Release was not the same as loss. He sat politely through the ceremonies of 2 and 3 and 4, increasingly bored as was each year. Then a break for midday meal, served outdoors, and back again to the seats for the 5s, 6s, 7s, and finally, last of the first day ceremonies, the 8s. Jonas watched and cheered as Lily marched proudly to the stage. She came in 8 and received the identifying jacket that she would wear this year. This one with smaller buttons and, for the first time, pockets, indicating that she was mature enough now to keep track of her own small belongings. She stood solemnly listening to the speech of firm instructions on the responsibilities of 8 and doing volunteer hours for the first time. But Jonas could see that Lily, though she seemed attentive, was looking longingly at the row of gleaming bicycles, which would be presented tomorrow morning to the 9s. Next year, Lily Billy, Jonas thought. It was an exciting day, and even Gabriel, retrieved in his basket from the nurturing center, slept soundly that night. Finally, it was the morning of the ceremony of 12. Now, father sat beside mother in the audience. Jonas could see them applauding dutifully at the nines. One by one wheeled their new bicycles, each with its gleaming name tag attached to the back, from the stage. He knew that his parents cringed a little, as he did, when Fritz, who lived in the dwelling next door to theirs, received his bike, and almost immediately bumped into the podium with it. Fritz was a very awkward child, who had been summoned for chastisement again and again. His transgressions were small ones, always. Shoes on the wrong feet, schoolwork misplaced, failure to study adequately for a quiz. But each such error reflected negatively on his parents' guidance and infringed on the community's sense of order and success. Jonas and his family had not been looking forward to Fritz's bicycle, which they realized would probably too often be dropped on the front walk instead of wheeled near. Retake all of that. Jonas and his family had not been looking forward to Fritz's bicycle, which they realized would probably too often be dropped on the front walk instead of wheeled neatly into its port. Finally, the nines were all resettled into their seats, each having wheeled a bicycle outside, where it would be waiting for its owner at the end of the day. Everyone always chuckled and made small jokes when the nines rode home for the first time. "Want to show you how to ride?" old friends would call. "I know you've never been on a bike before," but invariably the grinning nines, who in technical violation of the rule had been practicing secretly for weeks, would mount and ride off in perfect balance. Training wheels never touched the ground. Then the tens. Jonas never found the ceremony for 10 particularly interesting, only time-consuming, as each child's hair was snipped neatly into a distinguishing cut. Females lost their braids at 10, and males too relinquished their long childish hair and took on the more manly short style, which exposed their ears. Laborers moved quickly to the stage with brooms and swept away the mounds of discarded hair. Jonas could see the parents of the new tens stir and murmur, and he knew that this evening, in many dwellings, they would be snipping and straightening the hastily done haircuts, trimming them to a neater line. 11s. It seemed a short time ago that Jonas had undergone the ceremony of 11, but he remembered that it was not one of the more interesting ones. By 11, one was only waiting to be 12. It was simply a marking of time with no meaningful changes. There was new clothing, different undergarments for the females, whose bodies were beginning to change, and longer trousers for the males, with a specifically... Retake that. There was new clothing, different undergarments for the females, whose bodies were beginning to change, and longer trousers for the males, with a specially shaped pocket for the small calculator that they would use this year in school. Those were simply presented in wrapped packages, without an accompanying speech. Break for midday meal. Jonas realized he was hungry. He and his group mates Retake that. He and his group mates congregated by the tables in front of the auditorium and took their packaged food. Yesterday there had been merriment at lunch, a lot of teasing and energy. But today the group stood anxiously, separate from the other children. Jonas watched the new nines gravitate towards their waiting bicycles, each one admiring his or her name tag. He saw the 10 stroking their new shortened hair, females shaking their heads to feel the unaccustomed lightness without the heavy braids they had worn so long. Heard about a guy who was absolutely certain he was going to be a sign engineer, Asher murmured as they ate. Instead they gave him sanitation laborer. Went out the next day, jumped into the river, swam across, and joined the next community he came to. Nobody ever saw him again. Jonas laughed. "Somebody made that story up, Ash," he said. "Father said he heard that story when he was 12. But Asher wasn't reassured. He was eyeing the river where it was visible behind the auditorium. "Can't even swim very well," he said. "My swimming instructor said that I don't have the right boyishness or something." "Buoyancy," Jonas corrected him. "Whatever, I don't have it. I sink." "Anyway," Jonas pointed out, "have you ever once known of anyone, really known for sure, Asher not just heard a story about, who joined another community?" No, Asher admitted reluctantly. But you can. It says so in the rules. If you don't fit in, you can apply for elsewhere and be released. My mother says that once, about 10 years ago, someone applied and was gone the next day. Then he chuckled. She wanted that because I was driving her crazy. She threatened to apply for elsewhere. She was joking. I know, but it was true, what she said. Someone did that once. She said it was really true. Here today and gone tomorrow. Never seen again. Not even a ceremony of release. Jonas shrugged. Didn't worry him. How could someone not fit in? The community was so meticulously ordered, choices so carefully made. Even the matching of spouses was given such weighty consideration that sometimes an adult who applied to receive a spouse waited months or even years before a match was approved and announced. All of the factors, disposition, energy level, intelligence, and interest, had to correspond and to interact perfectly. Jonas's mother, for example, had higher intelligence than his father, but father had a calmer disposition. They balanced each other. Their match, which like all matches had been monitored by the committee of elders for 3 years before they could apply for children, had always been a successful one. Like the matching of spouses and the naming and placement of new children, the assignments were I have to wait a second here to figure out what that word is. Okay, yeah, there we go. Retake that. Like the matching of spouses and the naming and placement of new children, the assignments were scrupulously thought through by the committee of elders. He was certain that his assignment, whatever it was to be, and Asher's too, be the right one for them. He only wished that the midday break would conclude, the audience would re-enter the auditorium, and the suspense would end. Retake. As if in answer to his unspoken wish, the signal came and the crowd began to move toward the doors. Crap. Okay. Whoops. Trying to adjust my desk and everything's falling everywhere. Alright. Reading out loud for an extended period of time is tiring on the vocal cords. Holy crap. Who would have thought? Who would have thought? Page 50 out of 180, so about 1/5 of the way there, 20%. The Giver, Chapter 7. Now Jonas's group had taken a new place in the auditorium, trading with the new 11s, so that they sat in the very front, immediately before the stage. They were arranged by their original numbers that had been given at birth. Retake that. They were arranged by their original numbers, the numbers they had been given at birth. Numbers were rarely used after the naming, but each child knew his number, of course. Sometimes parents used them in irritation as a child's misbehavior, indicating that mischief made one unworthy of a name. Jonas always chuckled when he heard a parent, exasperated, call sharply to a whining toddler, "That's enough, 23! Jonas was 19. He had been the 19th new child born in his year. It meant that his naming, he had already... Retake that. It meant that at his naming, he'd already been standing and bright-eyed, soon to walk and talk. Give him a slight advantage the first year or two, a little more maturity than many of his groupmates who had been born in the later months of that year. But it evened out, as it always did, by 3. After 3, the children progressed at much the same level, though by their first number one could always tell who was a few months older than others in the group. Technically, Jonas's full number was 1119, since there were other 19s, of course, in each age group. And today, now that the new 11s had been advanced this morning, there were two 1119s. Midday break, he had exchanged smiles with the new one, a shy female named Harriet. But the duplication was only for those few hours. Very soon he would not be an 11, but a 12. And age would no longer matter. He would be an adult, like his parents, though a new one and untrained still. Asher was 4, and sat now in the row ahead of Jonas. He would receive his assignment 4th. Fiona, 18, was on his left. The other side sat 20, a male named Pierre, who Jonas didn't like much. Pierre was very serious, not much fun, and a worrier and tattletale too. Have you checked the room? Let me take that. Have you checked the rules, Jonas? Pierre was always whispering solemnly. Not sure that's within the rules. Usually it was some foolish thing that no one cared about, opening his tunic if it was a day with a breeze, taking a brief try on the friend's bicycle just to experience the different feel of it. The initial speech at the ceremony of 12 was made by the chief elder, the leader of the community who was elected every 10 years. The speech was much the same each year. Recollection of the time of childhood and the period of preparation, coming responsibilities of adult life, the profound importance of assignment, the seriousness of training to come. Then, the chief elder moved ahead in her speech. This is the time, she began, looking directly at them, when we acknowledge differences. You 11s have spent all your years till now learning to fit in, to standardize your behavior, to curb any impulse that might set you apart from the group. But today, we honor your differences. They have determined your futures. She began to describe this year's group and its variety of personalities. Though she singled no one out by name, she mentioned that there was one who had singular skills at caretaking, another who loved new children, one with unusual scientific aptitude, and a fourth for whom physical labor was an obvious pleasure. Jonas shifted in his seat, trying to recognize each reference as one of his groupmates. Caretaking skills were no doubt those of Fiona, on his left. He remembered noticing the tenderness with which she had bathed the old. Probably the one with scientific aptitude was Benjamin, who had devised new important equipment for the rehabilitation center. He heard nothing that he recognized as himself, Jonas. Finally, the chief elder paid tribute to the hard work of her committee, which had performed the observations so meticulously all year. The committee of elders stood and was acknowledged by applause. Jonas noted Asher yawned slightly, covering his mouth politely with his hand. Then at last, the chief elder called number 1 to the stage, and the assignments began. Each announcement was lengthy, accompanied by a speech directed at the new 12. Jonas tried to pay attention as 1, smiling happily, received her assignment as fish hatchery attendant, along with the words of praise for her childhood spent doing many volunteer hours there, and her obvious interest in the important process of providing nourishment for the community. Number 1. Her name is Madeline. Returned, finally amidst applause, to her seat, wearing the new badge that designated her fish hatchery attendant. Jonas was certainly glad that that assignment was taken. He wouldn't have wanted it. But he gave Madeline a smile of congratulation. Went 2, a female named Inger? Okay, retake that. When 2, a female named Inger, received her assignment as birth mother. Jonas remembered that his mother had called it a job without honor, but he thought that the committee had chosen well. Inger was a nice girl, though somewhat lazy, and her body was strong. She would enjoy the 3 years of being pampered that would follow her brief training. She would give birth easily and well, and the task of labor that would follow would use her strength, keep her healthy, and impose self-discipline. Inger was smiling when she resumed her seat. Birth mother was an important job if lacking in prestige. Jonas noticed that Asher looked nervous. He kept turning his head and glancing back at Jonas until the group leader had to give him a silent chastisement, a motion to sit still and face forward. 3. Isaac was given an assignment as instructor of sixes, which obviously pleased him and was well deserved. Now there were 3 assignments gone, none of the ones that Jonas would have liked. Not that he could have been a birth mother anyway, he realized with amusement. He tried to sort through the list in his mind, possible assignments that remained. There were so many he gave it up. And anyway, now it was Asher's turn. He paid strict attention as his friend went to the stage and stood self-consciously beside the chief elder. All of us in this community know and enjoy Asher, the chief elder began. Asher grinned and scratched one leg with the other foot. The audience chuckled softly. When the committee began to consider Asher's assignment, she went on, there were some possibilities that were immediately discarded, some that clearly not have been right for Asher. For example, she said, smiling, we did not consider for an instant designating Asher as instructor of 3s. The audience howled with laughter. Asher laughed too, looking sheepish but pleased at the special attention. The instructor of 3s were in charge of the acquisition of correct language. In fact, the chief elder continued, chuckling a little herself, we even gave little thought to some retroactive chastisement for the one who had been Asher's instructor of 3s so long ago. At the meeting where Asher was discussed, we retold many of the stories that were all remembered from his days of language acquisition. Especially, she said, chuckling, the difference between snack and smack. Remember, Asher? Asher nodded ruefully, and the audience laughed aloud. Jonas did too. He remembered, though he had been only a 3 at the time himself. The punishment used for small children was a regulated system of smacks with a discipline wand, a thin, flexible weapon that stung painfully when it was wielded. The child care specialists were trained very carefully in the discipline methods. A quick smack across the hands for a bit of minor misbehavior, 3 sharper smacks on the bare legs for a second offense. Poor Asher, who always talked too fast and mixed up words, even as a toddler. As a 3, eager for his juice and crackers at snack time, he one day said smack instead of snack as he stood waiting in line for the morning treat. Jonas remembered it clearly. He could still see little Asher wiggling with impatience in the line. He remembered the cheerful voice calling out, I want my smack. The other 3s, including Jonas, had laughed nervously. Snack, they corrected. You meant snack, Asher. But the mistake had been made, and precision in language was one of the most important tasks of small children. Asher had asked for a smack. The discipline wand in the hand of the childcare worker whistled as it came down across Asher's hands. Asher whimpered, cringed, and corrected himself instantly. Snack, he whispered. But the next morning he had done it again, and again the following week. He couldn't seem to stop, though for each lapse the discipline wand came again, escalating to a series of painful lashes that left marks on Asher's legs. Eventually, for a period of time, Asher stopped talking altogether when he was a 3. For a while, the chief elder said, relating the story, we had a silent Asher, but he learned. She turned to him with a smile. When he began to talk again, it was with greater precision, and now his lapses are very few. His corrections and apologies are very prompt, and his good humor is unfailing. The audience murmured in agreement. Asher's cheerful disposition was well known throughout the community. Asher, she lifted her voice to make the official announcement, we've given you the assignment of Assistant Director of Recreation. She clipped on his new badge as he stood beside her, beaming. Then he turned and left the stage as the audience cheered. When he had taken his seat again, the chief elder looked down at him and said the words that she had said now 4 times would say to each new 12, and somehow she gave a special meaning for each of them. Asher, she said, thank you for your childhood. The assignments continued, and Jonas watched and listened, relieved now by the wonderful assignment his best friend had been given. But he was more and more apprehensive as his own approached. Now the 12s in row ahead had all received their badges. They were fingering them as they sat, and Jonas knew that each one was thinking about the training that lay ahead. For some, one studious male had been selected as doctor, a female as engineer, another for law and justice. It would be years of hard work and study. Others, like laborers and birth mothers, would have a much shorter training period. 18 Fiona, on her left, was called. Retake that. 18 Fiona, on his left, was called. Jonas knew she must be nervous, but Fiona was a calm female. She had been sitting quietly, serenely throughout the ceremony. Even the applause, though enthusiastic, seemed serene when Fiona was given the important assignment of caretaker of the old. It was perfect for such a sensitive, gentle girl, and her smile was satisfied and pleased when she took her seat beside him again. Jonas prepared himself to walk to the stage when the applause ended, and the chief elder picked up the next folder and looked down to the group to call forward the next new 12. He was calm now that his turn had come, took a deep breath and smoothed his hair with his hand. 20, he heard her voice say clearly. Pierre. She skipped me, Jonas thought, stunned. Had he heard wrong? No. There was a sudden hush in the crowd, and he knew that the entire community realized that the chief elder had moved from 18 to 20, leaving a gap. On his right, Pierre, with a startled look, rose from his seat and moved to the stage. Mistake. She made a mistake. But Jonas knew, even as he had the thought, that she hadn't. The chief elder made no mistakes, not at the ceremony of 12. He felt dizzy, couldn't focus his attention. He didn't hear what assignment Pierre received, and was only dimly aware of the applause as the boy returned, wearing his new badge. Then, 21, 22. The numbers continued in order. Jonas sat, dazed, as they moved into the 30s, and then the 40s, nearing the end. Each time, as each announcement, his heart jumped for a moment, and he thought wild thoughts. Perhaps now she would call his name. Could he have forgotten his own number? No. He'd always been 19. He was sitting in the seat marked 19, but she had skipped him. He saw the others in his group glance at him, embarrassed, and then avert their eyes quickly. He saw a worried look on the face of his group leader. He hunched his shoulders and tried to make himself smaller in the seat. He wanted to disappear, to fade away, not to exist. Didn't dare to turn and find his parents in the crowd. Couldn't bear to see their faces darken with shame. Jonas bowed his head and searched through his mind. What had he done wrong? Before we move on to chapter 8, that sounds like, hey Jeff. Hey big boy. Okay, bub. Come here. Okay, bud. I gotta get back to reading, big boy. I got to put people to sleep. The Giver, Chapter 8. The audience was clearly ill at ease. They applauded at the final assignment. But the applause was piecemeal, no longer a crescendo of unified enthusiasm. There were murmurs of confusion. Jonas moved his hands together clapping, but it was an automatic, meaningless gesture that he wasn't even aware of. His mind had shut out all of the earlier emotions, the anticipation, excitement, pride, and even the happy kinship with his friends. Now he felt only humiliation and terror. The chief elder waited until the uneasy applause subsided. Then she spoke again. "I know," she said in her vibrant, gracious voice, "that you are all concerned, that you feel I have made a mistake." She smiled. The community, relieved from its discomfort very slightly by her benign statement, seemed to breathe more easily. It was very silent. Jonas looked up. "I have caused you anxiety," she said. "I apologize to my community." Her voice flowed over the assembled crowd. "We accept your apology," they all uttered together. "Jonas," she said, looking down at him, "I apologize to you in particular. I caused you anguish." "I accept your apology," Jonas replied shakily. "Please, come to the stage now." Earlier that day, dressing in his own dwelling, he had practiced the kind of jaunty, self-assured walk that he had hoped he could make to the stage when his turn came. All of that was forgotten now. He simply wheeled himself to stand, to move his feet that felt weighted and clumsy, to go forward, up the steps and across the platform until he stood at her side. Reassuringly, she placed her arm across his tense shoulders. "Jonas has not been assigned," she informed the crowd, and his heart sank. Then she went on. "Jonas has been selected." He blinked. What did that mean? He felt a collective questioning stir from the audience. They, too, were puzzled. In a firm, commanding voice, she announced, "Jonas has been selected to be our next receiver of memory." Then he heard the gasp, a sudden intake of breath, drawn sharply in astonishment by each of the seated citizens. He saw their faces, the eyes widened in awe. And still he did not understand. "Such a selection is very, very rare," the chief elder told the audience. "Our community has only one receiver. It is he who trains his successor. We have had our current receiver for a very long time," she went on. Jonas followed her eyes and saw that she was looking at one of the elders. The committee of elders was sitting together in a group, and the chief elder's eyes were now on one who sat in the midst, but seemed oddly separate from them. It was a man Jonas had never noticed before. Bearded man with the pale eyes. He was watching Jonas intently. "We failed in our last selection," the chief elder said solemnly. "It was 10 years ago, when Jonas was just a toddler. I will not dwell on the experience because it causes us all terrible discomfort." Jonas didn't know what she was referring to, but he could sense the discomfort of the audience. They shifted uneasily in their seats. "We have not been hasty this time," she continued. "We cannot afford another failure." "Sometimes," she went on, speaking now in a lighter tone, relaxing the tension in the auditorium, "we are not entirely certain about the assignments, even after the most painstaking observations. Sometimes we worry that the one assigned might not develop, through training, every attribute necessary. 11s are still children, after all. What we observe as playfulness and patience, the requirements to become a nurturer, could, with maturity, be revealed as simply foolishness and indolescence." So we continue to observe during training, and to modify behavior when necessary. I'll just retake that last bit. What we observe as playfulness and patience, the requirements to become a nurturer, could, with maturity, be revealed as simply foolishness and indolence. So we continue to observe during training, to modify behavior when necessary. But the receiver in training cannot be observed, cannot be modified. This is stated quite clearly in the rules. He is to be alone, apart, while he is prepared by the current receiver for the job, which is the most honored in our community. Alone? Apart? Jonas listened with increasing unease. Therefore, the selection must be sound. It must be a unanimous choice of the committee. They could have no doubts, however fleeting. If, during the process, now there reports a dream of uncertainty, that dream has the power to set a candidate aside instantly. Jonas was identified as a possible receiver many years ago. We observed him meticulously. There were no dreams of uncertainty. He has shown all the qualities that a receiver must have. With her hand still firmly on his shoulder, the chief elder listed the qualities. Intelligence, she said. We are all aware that Jonas has been a top student throughout his school days. Integrity, she said next. Jonas has, like all of us, committed minor transgressions. She smiled at him. We expect that. We hoped, also, that he would present himself promptly for chastisement, and he has always done so. Courage, she went on. Only one of us here today has ever undergone the rigorous training required of a receiver. He, of course, the most important member of the committee, the current receiver. It was he who reminded us again and again of the courage required. Jonas, she said, turning to him, but speaking in a voice that the entire community could hear. The training required of you involves pain, physical pain. He felt fear flutter within him. You have never experienced that. Yes, you have scraped your knees and falls from your bicycle. Yes, you have crushed your finger in a door last year. Jonas nodded, agreeing, as he recalled the incident and its accompanying misery. But you will be faced now, he explained gently, with pain of a magnitude that none of us here can comprehend because it is beyond our experience. The receiver himself was not able to describe it, only to remind us that you would be faced with it, that you would need immense courage. We cannot prepare you for that. But we feel certain that you are brave, she said to him. He did not feel brave at all. Not now. The fourth essential attribute, the chief elder said, is wisdom. Jonas has not yet acquired that. The acquisition of wisdom will come through his training. We are convinced that Jonas has the ability to acquire wisdom. That is what we looked for. Finally, the receiver must have one more quality, and it's one which I can only name but not describe. I do not understand it. You members of the community will not understand it either. Perhaps Jonas will, because the current receiver has told us that Jonas already has this quality. He calls it the capacity to see beyond. The chief elder looked at Jonas with a question in her eyes. The audience watched him too. They were silent. For a moment he froze, consumed with despair. He didn't have it. The whatever she had said. Didn't know what it was. Now is the moment when he would have to confess to say, no, I don't. I can't. And throw himself on the mercy, ask their forgiveness, to explain that he had been wrongfully chosen. He was not the right one at all. But when he looked out across the crowd, the sea of faces, the thing happened again. The thing that had happened with the apple. They changed. He blinked, and it was gone. His shoulders straightened slightly. Briefly, he felt a tiny sliver of sureness for the first time. She was still watching him. They all were. I think it's true, he told the chief elder and the community. I don't understand it yet, I don't know what it is, but sometimes I see something, and maybe it's beyond. She took her arm from his shoulders. Jonas, he said, speaking not to him alone, but to the entire community of which he was a part, you will be trained to be our next receiver of memory. We thank you for your childhood. Then she turned and left the stage, left him there alone, standing and facing the crowd, which began spontaneously the collective murmur of his name. Jonas. It was a whisper at first, hushed, barely audible. Jonas. Jonas. Then louder, faster. Jonas. 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 With the chant, Jonas knew the community was accepting him in his new role, giving him life the way they had given it to the new child Caleb. His heart swelled with the gratitude and pride. At the same time, he was filled with fear. He did not know what his selection meant. He did not know what he was to become, or what would become of him. Not too bad. Page 64, one. Yeah, we're about a third there. Nice. The Giver, Chapter 9. Now, for the first time in his 12 years of life, Jonas felt separate, different. He remembered what the chief elder had said, that his training would be alone and apart. But his training had not yet begun, and already, upon leaving the auditorium, he felt the apartness. Holding the folder she had given him, he made his way through the throng, looking for his family unit and for Asher. People moved aside for him. They watched him. Thought he could hear whispers. Ash, he called, spotting his friend near the rows of bicycles. Ride back with me? Sure. Ash smiled his usual smile, friendly and familiar. But Jonas felt a moment of hesitation from his friend, an uncertainty. Congratulations, Ash said. You too, Jonas replied. It was really funny when she told about the smacks. You got more applause than almost anybody else. The other new 12s clustered nearby, placing their folders carefully into their carrying containers on the backs of their bikes. In each dwelling tonight, they would be studying the instructions for the beginning of their training. Each night for years, the children had memorized the required lessons for school, often yawning with boredom. Tonight they would all begin eagerly to memorize the rules for their adult assignment. Congratulations, Asher, someone called. And that hesitation again. You too, Jonas. Asher and Jonas responded with congratulations to their group mates. Jonas saw his parents watching him from the place where their own bicycles were waiting. Lily had already strapped into her seat. He waved. He waved back, smiling, but he noticed that Lily was watching him solemnly, her thumb in her mouth. He rode directly to his dwelling, exchanging only small jokes and unimportant remarks with Asher. See you in the morning, Recreation Director, he called, dismounting by his door, as Asher continued on. Right, see you, Asher called back. Once again, there was just a moment when things weren't quite the same, weren't quite as they had always been through the long friendship. Perhaps he had imagined it. Things couldn't change with Asher. The evening meal was quieter than usual. Lily chattered about her plans for volunteer work. She would begin, she said, at the nurturing center, since she was already an expert at feeding Gabriel. I know, she added quickly when her father gave her a warning glance. I won't mention his name. I know I'm not supposed to know his name. Can't wait for tomorrow to come, she said happily. Jonas sighed uneasily. I can, he muttered. You've been greatly honored, his mother said. Your father and I are very proud. It's the most important job in the community, father said. But just the other night you said that the job of making assignments was the most important. Mother nodded. This is different. It's not a job, really. Never expected. She paused. It's only one receiver. But the chief elder said that they had made a decision before. Retake that. But the chief elder said that they had made a selection before and that it failed. What was she talking about? Both of his parents hesitated. Finally, his father described the previous selection. It was very much as it was today, Jonas. The same suspense, as 111 had been passed over when the assignments were given. Then the announcement, when they singled out the one. Jonas interrupted. What was his name? Mother replied. Her, not his. It was a female. We were never to speak the name, or to use it again for a new child. Jonas was shocked. A name designated not to be spoken indicated the highest degree of disgrace. What happened to her? He asked nervously. But his parents looked blank. We don't know, his father said uncomfortably. We never saw her again. Silence fell over the room. They looked at each other. Finally, his mother, rising from the table, said, You've been greatly honored, Jonas. Greatly honored. Alone in his sleeping room, prepared for bed, Jonas opened his folder last. Some of the other 12s he had noticed had been given folders thick with printed pages. He imagined Benjamin, the scientific male in his group, beginning to read pages of rules and instructions with relish. He pictured Fiona smiling her gentle smile as she bent over the lists of duties and methods that she would be required to learn in the days to come. But his own folder was startlingly close to empty. Inside there was only a single printed sheet. He read it twice. Jonas, receiver of memory. 1. Go immediately at the end of school hours each day to the annex entrance behind the house of the old and present yourself to the intendant. 2. Go immediately to your dwelling at the conclusion of training hours each day. 3. From this moment, you are exempted from rules governing rudeness. You may ask any question of any citizen, and you will receive answers. 4. Do not discuss your training with any other member of the community, including parents and elders. 5. From this moment, you are prohibited from dream telling. 6. Except for illness or injury unrelated to your training, do not apply for any medication. 7. You are not permitted to apply for release. 8. You may lie. Jonas was stunned. What would happen to his friendships, his mindless hours playing ball, or riding his bike along the river? Those that had been happy and vital times for him. Were they to be completed? Take that. Were they to be completely taken from him now? The simple logistic instructions, where to go and when, were expected. Every 12 had to be told, of course, where and how and when to report for training. But he was a little dismayed that his schedule left no time, apparently, for recreation. The exemption for rudeness startled him. Reading it again, however, he realized that it didn't compel him to be rude. It simply allowed him the option. He was quite certain he would never take advantage of it. He was so thoroughly accustomed to courtesy within the community that he thought of asking another citizen an intimate question, of calling someone's attention to an area of awkwardness, was unnerving. The prohibition of dream-telling, he thought, would not be a real problem. He dreamed so rarely that the dream-telling did not come easily to him anyway. He was glad to be excused from it. He wondered briefly, though, how to deal with it at the morning meal. What if he did dream? Should he simply tell his family unit, as he did so often anyway, that he hadn't? That would be a lie. Still, final rule said, well, wasn't quite ready to think about the final rule on the page. The restrictions of medication unnerved him. Medication was always available to citizens, even to children, through their parents. When he had crushed his finger in the door, he had quickly, gasping into the speaker, notified his mother. She had hastily requisitioned relief of pain medication, which had promptly been delivered. He was dwelling. Almost instantly, the excruciating pain in his hand had diminished to the throb, which was now all he could recall of the experience. Rereading number 6, he realized that a crushed finger fell into the category of unrelated to training. So if it ever happened again, and he was quite certain it wouldn't, he had been very careful near heavy doors since the accident. He could still receive medication. The pill he took now, each morning, was also unrelated to training, so he would continue to receive the pill. But he remembered uneasily what the chief elder had said about the pain that would come with his training. She had called it indescribable. Jonas swallowed hard, trying without success to imagine what such pain might be like, with no medication at all. But it was beyond his comprehension. He felt no reaction to rule number 7 at all. It never occurred to him that under any circumstances ever he might apply for release. Finally, he steeled himself to read the final rule again. He had been trained since earliest childhood, since his earliest learnings of language, never to lie. It was an integral part of the learning of precise speech. Once, when he had been of 4, he had said, just prior to the midday meal at school, "I am starving." Immediately, he had been taken aside for a brief private lesson in language precision. He was not starving, it was pointed out. He was hungry. No one in the community was starving, had ever been starving, would ever be starving. To say starving was to speak a lie. An unintentional lie, of course, but the reason for precision of language was to ensure that unintentional lies were never uttered. Did he understand that? They asked him. And he had. He had never, within his memory, been tempted to lie. Asher did not lie. Lily did not lie. His parents did not lie. No one did. Unless... Now Jonas had a thought they had never had before. This new thought was frightening. What if others, adults, had, upon becoming 12s, received in their instructions the same terrifying sentence? What if they had all been instructed, "You may lie"? His mind reeled. Now, empowered to ask questions of utmost rudeness and promised answers, he could, conceivably, though it was almost unimaginable, ask someone, some adult, his father perhaps, "Do you lie?" But he have no way of knowing if the answer he received was true. Taking a quick drink break. I can see why reading books for a profession is very hard. It's a toll on the voice after a while. Like you could already tell, just speaking for a couple hours already, it's just like, whoa, rough. All right, take another sip. Might need to go down and grab some water instead of bubbly. Let's see. All right. We're almost halfway there. The Giver, Chapter 10. I go in here, Jonas, Fiona told him when they reached the front door of the House of the Old, after parking their bicycles in the designated area. Don't know why I'm nervous, she confessed. Been here so often before. She turned her folder over in her hands. Well, everything's different now, Jonas reminded her. Even the nameplates on their bikes. Retake that. Even the nameplates on our bikes, Fiona laughed. During the night, the nameplate of each new 12 had been removed by the maintenance crew and replaced with a style that indicated citizen in training. I don't want to be late, she said hastily and started up the stairs. Finish at the same time, I'll ride home with you. Retake that. We finish at the same time, I'll ride home with you. Jonas nodded, waved to her, and headed around the building towards the annex. Small wing attached to the back. He certainly didn't want to be late for his first day of training either. The annex was very ordinary, its door unremarkable. He reached for the heavy handle, then noticed a buzzer on the wall. So he buzzed instead. Yes? The voice came through a small speaker above the buzzer. It's, Jonas. I'm the new, I mean, come in. Click indicated that the door had been unlatched. The lobby was very small and contained only a desk at which a female attendant sat working on a small... Retake that. The lobby was very small and contained only a desk at which a female attendant sat working on some papers. She looked up when he entered. Then, to his surprise, she stood. It was a small thing, the standing, but no one had ever stood automatically to acknowledge Jonas's presence before. Welcome, receiver of memory, she said respectfully. Oh, please, he replied uncomfortably. Call me Jonas. She smiled, pushed a button, and heard a click that unlocked the door to her left. Hey, go right in, she told him. Then she seemed to notice his discomfort and to realize his origin. No doors in the community were locked, ever. None that Jonas knew of, anyway. The locks are simply to ensure the receiver's privacy because he needs concentration, she explained. It'd be difficult if citizens wandered in looking for the Department of Bicycle Repair or something. Jonas laughed, relaxing a little. The woman seemed very friendly, and it was true. In fact, it was a joke throughout the community that the Department of Bicycle Repair, an unimportant little office, was relocated so often that no one ever knew where it was. There was nothing dangerous here, she told him. But, she added, glancing at the wall clock, he doesn't like to be kept waiting. Jonas hurried through the door and found himself in a comfortably furnished living area, not unlike his own family Eunice dwelling. Furniture was standard throughout the community, practical, sturdy, function of each piece clearly defined. A bed for sleeping, a table for eating, a desk for studying. All those things were in the spacious room, though each was slightly different for those in his own dwelling. The fabrics on the unupholstered... Retake that. Fabrics on the upholstered chairs and sofa were slightly thicker and more luxurious. The table legs were not straight like those at his home, but slender and curved, with a small carved decoration at the foot. The bed, in an alcove at the far end of the room, was draped with a splendid cloth embroidered over its entire surface with intricate designs. But the most conspicuous difference was the books. In his own dwelling, there were the necessary reference volumes that each household contained. Dictionary, and a thick community volume which contained descriptions of every office, factory, building, and committee, and the Book of Rules, of course. Books in his own dwelling were the only books that Jonas had ever seen. He had never known that other books existed. But this room's walls were completely covered by bookcases, filled, which reached to the ceiling. There must have been hundreds, perhaps thousands, of books, and their titles embossed in shiny letters. Jonas stared at them. He couldn't imagine what the thousands of pages contained. Could there be rules beyond the rules that govern the community? Could there be more descriptions of offices and factories and committees? He had only a second to look around because he was aware that the man sitting in a chair beside the table was watching him. Hastily, he moved forward, stood before the man, bowed slightly and said, "I'm Jonas." "I know. Welcome, receiver of memory." Jonas recognized the man. He was the elder who had seemed separate from the others at the ceremony, though he was dressed in the same special clothing that only elders wore. Jonas looked self-consciously into the pale eyes that mirrored his own. "Sir, I apologize for my lack of understanding." He waited, but the man did not give the standard accepting of apology response. After a moment, Jonas went on. "But I thought, I think," he corrected, reminding himself that if precision of language were ever to be important, certainly important now, in the presence of this man, "that you are the receiver of memory. I was only selected yesterday. Not anything at all. Not yet." The man looked at him thoughtfully, silently. It was a look that combined interest, curiosity, concern, and perhaps a little sympathy as well. Finally, he spoke. "Beginning today, this moment, at least to me, you are the receiver." "I've been the receiver for a long time. A very, very long time. You can see that, can't you?" Jonas nodded. The man was wrinkled, and his eyes, though piercing in their unusual lightness, seemed tired. Flesh around them was darkened into shadow circles. "I can see that you are very old," Jonas responded with respect. The old were always given the highest respect. The man smiled. He touched the sagging flesh on his own face with amusement. "I am not actually as old as I look," he told Jonas. "This job has aged me. Retake that. I know I look as if I should be scheduled for release very soon, but actually, I have a good deal of time left. I was pleased, though, when you were selected. It took them a long time. The failure of the previous selection was 10 years ago, and my energy is starting to diminish. I need what strength I have remaining for your training. We have hard and painful work to do, you and I. Please, sit down," he said, and gestured towards the nearby chair. Jonas lowered himself onto the soft cushioned chair. The man closed his eyes and continued speaking. "When I became a 12, I was selected, as you were. I was frightened, I'm sure. Retake that. When I became a 12, I was selected, as you were. I was frightened, as I'm sure you are." He opened his eyes for a moment and peered at Jonas, who nodded. He eyes closed again. "I came to this very room to begin my training. It was such a long time ago. The previous receiver seemed just as old to me as I do to you. He was just as tired as I am today." He sat forward suddenly, opening his eyes, and said, "You may ask questions. I have so little experience in describing this process, it is forbidden to talk of it." "I know, sir. I have read the instructions," Jonas said. "So I may neglect to make things as clear as I should," the man chuckled. "My job is important and has enormous honor. That does not mean I am perfect, and when I tried before to train a successor, I failed." Please ask any questions that will help you. In his mind, Jonas had questions. 1,000, 1,000,000 questions. As many questions as there were books lining the walls. But he did not ask one. Not yet. The man sighed, seeming to put his thoughts in order. Then he spoke again. Simply stated, he said, although it's not really simple at all, my job is to transmit to you all the memories I have within me. Memories of the past. Sir, Jonas said attentively, I'm very interested to hear the story of your life and to listen to your memories. I apologize for interrupting, he added quickly. The man waved his hand impatiently. Oh, that was Jonas. I apologize for interrupting, he added quickly. The man waved his hand impatiently. No apologies in this room. We haven't time. Well, Jonas went on uncomfortably, aware that he might be interrupting again. I'm really interested. I don't mean that I'm not, but I don't exactly understand why it's so important. Do some adult job in the community, and my recreation time I could come and listen to the stories from your childhood. I'd like that, actually. He added. Done that already, in the House of the Old. The old like to tell about their childhoods, and it's always fun to listen. The man shook his head. No, he said. I'm not being clear. It's not my past, not my childhood that I must transmit to you. He leaned back, resting his head against the back of the upholstered chair. It's the memories of the whole world, he said with a sigh. Before you, before me, before the previous receiver, and generations before him. Jonas frowned. The whole world? He asked. I don't understand. Do you mean not just us? Not just the community? Do you mean elsewhere too? He tried in his mind to grasp the concept. I'm sorry, sir. I don't understand exactly. Maybe I'm not smart enough. Don't know what you mean when you say the whole world, or generations before him. Thought there was only us. Thought there was only now. There's much more. There's all that goes beyond, all that is elsewhere, and all that goes back and back and back. I received all of those when I was selected. And here in this room, all alone, I re-experience them again and again. It is how wisdom comes, and how we shape our future. He rested for a moment, breathing deeply. I am so weighted with them, he said. Jonas felt a terrible concern for the man suddenly. It's as if... The man paused, seeming to search his mind for the right words of description. It's like going downhill through deep snow on a sled, he said, finally. At first it's exhilarating, the speed, the sharp, clear air. But then the snow accumulates, builds up on the runners, and you slow. You have to push hard to keep going, and... He shook his head suddenly and peered at Jonas. That meant nothing to you, did it? He asked. Jonas was confused. I didn't understand it, sir. Of course you didn't. You don't know what snow is, do you? Jonas shook his head. Or a sled? Runners? No, sir, Jonas said. Downhill? Term means nothing to you? Nothing, sir. Well, it's a place to start. I've been wondering how to begin. Move to the bed and lie face down. Remove your tunic first. Jonas did so, a little apprehensively. Beneath his bare chest, he felt the soft folds of the magnificent robe. Detect that. Beneath his bare chest, he felt the soft folds of the magnificent cloth that covered the bed. He watched as the man rose and moved first to the wall where the speaker was. It was the same sort of speaker that occupied a place in every dwelling, but one thing about it was different. This one had a switch, which the man definitely snapped to the end, that said off. Jonas almost gasped aloud. Have the power to turn the speaker off? It was an astonishing thing. And the man moved with surprising quickness to the corner where the bed was. He sat on a chair beside Jonas, who was motionless, waiting for what would happen next. Close your eyes, relax. This will not be painful. Jonas remembered that he was allowed, that he'd even been encouraged to ask questions. What are you going to do, sir? He asked, hoping that his voice didn't betray his nervousness. I am going to transmit the memory of snow, the old man said, placed his hands on Jonas's bare back. The Giver, Chapter 11. Jonas felt nothing unusual at first. He felt only the light touch of the old man's hand on his back. He tried to relax, to breathe evenly. The room was absolutely silent, and for a moment Jonas feared that he might disgrace himself now, on the first day of his training, by falling asleep. Then he shivered. He realized that the touch of the hands felt, suddenly, cold. The same instant, breathing in, he felt the air change, and his very breath was cold. He licked his lips, and in doing so, his tongue touched the suddenly chilled air. It was very startling, but he was not at all frightened. He was filled with energy, and he breathed again, feeling the sharp intake of frigid air. Now, too, he could feel cold air swirling around his entire body. He felt it blow against his hands where they lay at their sides and over his back. The touch of the man's hands seemed to have disappeared. I became aware of an entirely new sensation. Pinpricks? Take that. Now he became aware of an entirely new sensation. Pinpricks? No, because they were soft and without pain. Tiny, cold, feather-like feelings peppered his body and face. He put out his tongue again and caught one of the dots of cold upon it. It disappeared from his awareness instantly, but he caught another and another. The sensation made him smile. One part of his consciousness knew that he was still lying there on the bed in the annex room. Yet another separate part of his being was upright now, in a sitting position. Beneath him he could feel that he was not on the soft decorated bed covering at all, but rather seated on a flat, hard surface. His hands now held, though at the same time they were still motionless at his sides, a rough, damp rope. And he could see, though his eyes were closed. He could see a bright, whirling torrent of crystals in the air around him. He could see them gather on the backs of his hands, like cold fur. His breath was visible. Beyond, through the swirl of what he now somehow perceived was a thing the old man had spoken of. No. He could look out and down a great distance. He was up high someplace. The ground was thick with the furry snow, but he sat slightly above it on a hard, flat object. Sled, he knew abruptly. He's sitting on a thing called sled. The sled itself seemed to be poised at the top of a long, extended mound that rose from the very land where he was. Even as he thought the word mound, he knew. Let me take that. Even as he thought the word mound, his new consciousness told him hill. Then the sled, with Jonas himself upon it, began to move through the snowfall, and he understood instantly that now he was going downhill. No voice made an explanation. The experience explained itself to him. His face cut through the frigid air as he began the descent, moving through the substance called snow, on the vehicle called sled, which propelled itself on what he now knew without doubt to be runners. Comprehending all of those things as he sped downward, he was free to enjoy the breathless glee that overwhelmed him. The speed, the clear cold air, the total silence, the feeling of balance and excitement and peace. Then, as the angle of incline lessened, as the mound, the hill, flattened near the bottom, the sled's forward motion retake that. Then, as the angle of incline lessened, as the mound, the hill, flattened near the bottom, the sled's forward motion slowed. The snow was piled now around it, and he pushed with his body, moving it forward, not wanting the exhilarating ride to end. Finally, the obstruction of the piled snow was too much for the thin runners of the sled, and he came to a stop. He sat there for a moment, panting, holding the rope in his cold hands. Attentively, he opened his eyes. Not his snow hill sled eyes. They had been opened throughout the strange ride. He opened his ordinary eyes, and saw that he was still in the bed, that he had not moved at all. The old man, still behind the bed, was watching him. "How do you feel?" he asked. Jonas sat up and tried to answer honestly. "Surprised," he said after a moment. The old man wiped his forehead with his sleeve. "Ooh," he said. "It was exhausting, but even transmitting that tiny memory to you, I think it lightened me just a little." "Do you mean? You did say I could ask questions." Man nodded, encouraging his question. "Do you mean that now you don't have the memory of it? That ride on the sled anymore?" "That's right. A little weight off this old body." "But it was such fun, and now you don't have it anymore. They took it from you." But the old man laughed. "All I gave you was one ride, on one sled, in one snow, on one hill. I have a whole world of them in my memory. I could give them to you one by one 1,000 times. There would still be more." "Are you saying that I mean, we could do it again?" Jonas asked. "I'd really like to. I think I could steer by pulling the rope. Didn't try this time because it was so new." The old man, laughing, shook his head. "Maybe another day for a treat, but there's no time, really, just to play. Well, I wanted to begin by showing you how it works. Now," he said, turning businesslike, "lie back down. I want to—" Jonas did. He was eager for whatever experience would come next, but he had suddenly so many questions. "Why don't we have snow and sleds and hills?" he asked. "And when did we, in the past, did my parents have sleds when they were young? Did you?" The old man shrugged and gave a short laugh. "No," he told Jonas. "A very distant memory. That's why it's so exhausting. I had to tug it forward for many generations back. It was given to me when I was a new receiver, and the previous receiver had to pull it through a long time period, too." "But what happened to those things? Snow and the rest of it?" Climate control. Snow made growing food difficult, limited the agriculture periods. And unpredictable weather made transportation almost impossible at times. It wasn't a practical thing, so it became obsolete when we went to sameness. And hills, too, he added. They made conveyance of goods unwieldy. Trucks, buses, slowed them down. So, he waved his hand as if a gesture had caused him to retake that. He waved his hand as if a gesture had caused hills to disappear. Sameness, he concluded. Jonas frowned. I wish we had those things still, just now and then. The old man smiled. So do I, he said. But that choice is not ours. But sir, Jonas suggested, since you have so much power. The man corrected him. Honor, he said firmly. I have great honor, so will you. But you will find that that is not the same as power. Lie quietly now. Since we've entered into the topic of climate, let me give you something else. And this time I'm not going to tell you the name of it, because I want to test the receiving. You should be able to perceive the name without being told. I gave away snow and sled and downhill and runners by telling them to you in advance. Without being... Let me take that. Without being instructed, Jonas closed his eyes again. He felt the hands on his back again. He waited. Now came more quickly the feelings. This time the hands didn't become cold. Let me take that. This time the hands didn't become cold, but instead began to feel warm on his body. They moistened a little. The warmth spread, extending across his shoulders, up his neck, onto the side of his face. He could feel it through his clothed parts too. A pleasant all-over sensation. And when he licked his lips this time, it was hot and heavy. He didn't move. There was no sled. Posture didn't change. He was simply alone someplace, out of doors, lying down, and the warmth came from far above. It's not as exciting as the ride through the snowy air, but it was pleasurable and comforting. Suddenly he perceived the word for it. Sunshine. He perceived that it came from the sky. Then it ended. Sunshine, he said aloud, opening his eyes. Good. You did get the word. That makes my job easier. Not so much explaining. And it came from the sky. That's right, the old man said. Just the way it used to. Before sameness, before climate control, Jonas added. The man laughed. You receive well and learn quickly. I'm very pleased with you. That's enough for today, I think. We're off to a great start. There was a question bothering Jonas. Sir, he said, Chief Elder told me, she told everyone, and you told me too, that it'd be painful. So I was a little scared, but it didn't hurt at all. I really enjoyed it. He looked quizzically at the old man. The man sighed. I started you with memories of pleasure. My previous failure gave me the wisdom to do that. He took a few deep breaths. Jonas, he said, it will be painful, but it need not be painful yet. I'm brave, I really am. Jonas sat up a little straighter. The old man looked at him for a moment. He smiled. I can see that, he said. Well, since you asked the question, I think I have enough energy for one more transmission. Lie down once more. This will be the last today. Jonas obeyed cheerfully, closed his eyes waiting, felt the hands again. Then he felt the warmth again, the sunshine again, coming from the sky of this other consciousness that was so new to him. This time, as he lay basking in the wonderful warmth, he felt the passage of time. His real self was aware that it was only a minute or two, but his other, memory-receiving self felt hours pass in the sun. His skin began to sting. Restlessly, he moved one arm, bending it, and felt a sharp pain in the crease of his inner arm at the elbow. "Ouch," he said loudly and shifted on the bed. "Ow," he said, wincing at the shift. Even moving his mouth to speak made his face hurt. He knew there was a word, but the pain kept him from grasping it. Then it ended. He opened his eyes, wincing with discomfort. "It hurt," he told the man. "I couldn't get the word for it." "It was sunburn," the old man told him. "It hurt a lot," Jonas said. "I'm glad you gave it to me. It was interesting. Now I understand better what it meant. There would be pain." The man didn't respond. He sat silently for a second. Finally, he said, "Get up, now. It's time for you to go home." They both walked to the center of the room. Jonas put his tunic back on. "Goodbye, sir," he said. "Thank you for my first day." The old man nodded to him. He looked drained, a little sad. "Sir?" Jonas said shyly. "Yes, do you have a question?" "Just that I don't know your name. Thought you were the receiver. They said that..." Retake that. "Just that I don't know your name. I thought you were the receiver. They say that now I'm the receiver. So I don't know what to call you." The man had sat back down in a comfortable upholstered chair, moved his shoulders around as if to ease away an aching sensation. He seemed terribly weary. "Call me the Giver," he told Jonas. And I think that's where we're going to wrap up for today. Didn't realize this would actually take such a toll on my voice. My throat's a little sore, so I'm going to need to prep for that. Probably do shorter sessions with this. But kind of liking it. We are pretty much exactly halfway through chapter 12. So we'll wrap up with this another time. About like a 6 hour. I definitely can't do 6 hours of reading. That's a little much. I can already tell my voice is starting to crack a little. But yeah, no, this was fun. We'll continue with chapter 12 another time. Probably not tomorrow, but I will do this occasionally. So yeah, I think that's it. It's only about a 3 hour thing, but yeah, I think 3 hours is going to have to be for what I do for readings, like 2 to 3 hours. Didn't realize how much more I speak when I'm actually reading versus playing a game or something. But yeah, we'll do this, and we'll be back again with it. Looking forward to editing this down the road, so that'll be kind of fun. I want to get these up posted right quick. But yeah, that'll be it. So thanks for hanging out, Evie. Much appreciated that you hung out. I hope that you got some sleep in there, or that I lulled you to sleep. But let's just transition over to the end here, which of course is our Clouder of Kitties for the end of the stream. We'll be back again with the Giver, so thanks so much for that. If you are checking this out as a video after it's gone live, and you do like this, or you want to check out other stuff, or you want to hang out when I'm doing more active stuff like games and stuff, then feel free to drop a subscribe and ring that bell so you can catch me live next time. It'd be great to hang out, chat with you. If you do like what you see, drop a like. If you dislike what you see, drop a dislike. Comment down below either way. It's good for the YouTube algorithm and for engagement and all that jazz. But yeah, I think that's it. Kind of distracted that my voice is kind of cracked right now. But yeah, I have a Discord server. Feel free to check that out. Link is in my YouTube homepage in the description for it. So feel free to check that out. It's a safe, welcoming environment and community. I kind of like this, but obviously I was stumbling over some stuff. It is hard to. It's one thing to read it in your mind. It's another thing to have to verbalize it and actually pronounce it correctly. So learn that the hard way. Learn that the way that's required, which is to actually say it. And obviously there were words that I was stumbling over. But yeah, no, this was fun. I guess outside of that, just covering real quick what this channel is all about. I'm all about supporting cats and supporting animals in general. Eventually, I want to support charities, organizations, and shelters that take care of animals that are less fortunate and unable to find families for their forever home. And eventually down the road, I want to kind of support them in the way that I can. So by supporting this channel, by supporting me in these streams and stuff like that and videos, you also support cats in need. And right now, I can say I appreciate and thank you for supporting the cats that you see on stream right now, Maya, Jeff, and Safi. So thank you so much for that. I'm sure Jeff is much appreciated of that. But yeah, that's basically it. I'll be back again. I need to have like some massive water. I think next time I do a reading, I'll need to have a lot of water and take a lot more water between chapters, because I don't think bubbly is cutting it. So I'll have to actually get like water, not bubbly. But yeah, that'll be it for now. I'll be back again. So stay tuned for that. Nothing tomorrow night, since it's Tuesday going into Wednesday. I don't do any streaming. Probably back Wednesday or Thursday, something like that. So keep an eye out for that. Until then, you'll take care of yourself. Make sure you're number one priority for yourselves. And once you do that, you can take care of others. So make sure you take care of yourself so that you can take care of others that matter to you. I'll be back again. So until then, take care. And guess I'll catch you in the next catastrophe, folks. See you later, my kitty cats.